hui with an opening courage care, please. Councillor Thurston.
Colleagues in gallery, please be upstanding. At the end of the karakia, everybody, the chairman has asked that everyone in the chamber remain standing. Never let us forget we're forever in the holy presence of God. Almighty God, we ask that you give us wisdom in the decisions we make here today and give us guidance in working with our regional communities to promote their social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being. Amen. Please remain standing.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. As members of staff are aware, during the last week there was a passing of a very valued staff member, so I'd just like to offer a karakia in recognition of Moana Boyd. Tēnā tātou, tangi te mai, tangi riri mai, e tangi tikapa nei te manawa mō e te hui kai manawa e Moana. Kua riro nei. Thank you, everybody. Please be seated.
Kia ora.
Next item on the agenda is apologies. We have no apologies, but we have 4 councillors on Zoom. Welcome, councillors on Zoom. Next item is the public forum. Today we have Jemima Williams. Jemima, would you like to take a seat at the beginning here? You can bring your mother, is it? Up as well. It's nice to have someone you feel comfortable with sitting beside you. So Jemima, as you know, one of the agenda items today is security issues around public transport in Tauranga Moana, especially in Tauranga here. Last week you had the opportunity to speak to the Chief Executive. As a result of that discussion, we thought it was appropriate that you spoke to the collective councillors here in terms of your experience working as a security agent, trying to remedy or alleviate some of the issues that we're trying to deal with. So the floor's yours. Feel free to speak frankly, and we'll, at the end of your presentation, I'll give councillors the opportunity to answer any questions they may have of your presentation. Thank you.
Before I start, good morning, nephew Stacey. It's good to see you there. My name is Jemima Kiriona, and I've worked security over the last 22 years. Oh, that's much better. Last 22 years, 4 to 5 of those years been as a security guard for Tauranga Council in chambers, at the library and down the bus bays. And in my experience, the security guarding at the CBD, bus bays especially, is not a normal security job. It's actually a type of social work. And down there, the different, I was with New Tech Security, now we have Allied. It's not about our guards not being capable of doing the job, but it takes a special skill. You're dealing with the public. You're dealing with our elderly who feel very vulnerable at times without having any threatening things happening around them. You're dealing with our rangatahi, our young youth, between the ages of 10 and 18. You're dealing with our street people, and then you're dealing with the general public. And also in the future, hopefully, we'll be dealing with our tourists and visitors coming more to Tauranga. So when I was in security, we worked with our police, and our police are very good, but they are understaffed and undernumbered. And when we needed their help, or we called them, a lot of the times they couldn't come quickly, or they couldn't come at all because they were busy in other parts of our community that were needing them. So what I found in my time down there, that it took a lot, probably a year for me to get used to the culture down there, the people, the mixture of culture. And then it was building relationships with everybody and anybody down there. Because in the end, if police couldn't come and there were disturbances, you were security who had to try and de-escalate, manage it. I don't like to use the word control, but it is about controlling it to a point. And then making those that felt that were in harm feel safe. That's a lot going on mentally, that's a lot going on physically, and that's a lot of different social groups. So I believe over these last few years, you'll never get rid of that problem at any bus bay where you have different people from different backgrounds catching buses. You are always going to have that mixture. So what you need to do is look at it as being managed and then have the right supports to manage it. It's never gonna go away, not in any social group. You always have that continuing. The security down there needs some type of authority. The police have the authority for the law, but they need something that'll help them move, like our teenagers, be able to move them on. The security need to also have the support of the schools. A lot of these children that are down the bus bays are turning up in uniforms. They're not going to school. They don't care about the law because in their minds, they're under the age of. And so we need to find a way to help support, encouraging them into feeling part of the community, taking responsibility for their actions, because a lot of the time when our youth play up, and I've done it myself, we tend to word things in newspapers or say things that start to separate them. And what that does is when you separate a person in the community, it almost says to them, oh, well, you don't care, I'm apart from you, therefore I have no responsibility to my community. And their behaviour changes, and we need to change that. It's a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of parts of social works to get together. I know in my experience that a lot of social groups have been trying to get together to do it, but real conversations have to be had. I finished security about 6 months ago. I've gone to a new job. I work night times, Monday to Friday, controlling our streets with traffic management. But what I do is, on my days off, I go down and I sit down there at the bus stop. I'm in my car at the bus stop, and I hang out and watch. And we need to do that. The reason I do that is, I will say quite frankly, I give a shit. I'm not saying nobody else does, but if I have that time out of my day when I wake up from night shifts to go down there and I just sit there. And a lot of the young ones down there, they'll see me and they'll yell across the road, hey, auntie, what are you doing? It's not that I'm special, it's just that I've got the time, and even when I'm working, I want to have the time to go down and see what's happening. Our bus drivers are awesome. I'll see them and wave out, what are you doing down here? Just came to check up on things. You know how much that encourages our bus drivers? They get so much rubbish going on. And our elderly that I see down there that I saw before. What are you doing now, girl? Well, I see you're still catching the bus. They feel safe because it's a connection with your community. And when you have that connection with your community, it builds that safety net. It makes people feel good. It makes them feel they've been looked after and that somebody is giving a shit. And we have all our folk like you who have the hard job of doing budgets and organising and meetings. I'm glad I don't have that job. I think I'd rather get punched in the face in security. But I'm just saying we just need to be working together and have real conversation. There's real problems going down there. These children should be made responsible for their actions. At the same time, there should be a community of people having a listening ear, because some of them come from some very, very bad backgrounds and they're just following what they've seen. COVID did a lot for our youth. If it threw us 4-6, it is most definitely throwing our youth. And that's not an excuse. When I work with them, I said, if I see it, if I hear it, I report it. You have to let them know that they can't do whatever they want. But at the same time, they knew my heart was saying, if you need to talk, if you're in the shits today and you need somewhere to go, then I'm there as well. You just have to care genuinely, and anyone can feel it. The streetie, the elderly person, the general public, and our young ones. And that's what we need to keep reminding ourselves. And it's hard because the world is busy and it is fast. But we have to have times when we remind ourselves we are a community, and there are people, unfortunately, in our community who are making trouble, and we need to make them responsible for it, but not just push them out there. That gives the person the first criminals will tell you themselves, I felt on the outside. Therefore, I gave myself a reason to, if you, let's go here and do whatever we want. So that's what I wanted to say. People have the security down there at the moment, and this is not personal for them or at them, but they have some restrictions, and I think those restrictions need to be lifted, whether it's their company or not. There needs to be a certain amount of interaction with our security guards and the public. But to do that, you need to have the right people, and it's not a normal security job. Observe and report. There's a lot more that goes down there. And so that needs to be considered when choosing the security firms or the guards. And it needs to take about 6 months to a year to build some sort of rapport with the public. That's about how long it took the last company. And if you're working with a whole network of people like that in different social sectors, it takes a lot. It's not a quick fix. Our police also need to be considered when choosing security. They can't always get down there when there are emergencies, and I know we experienced a few fights amongst the young ones where our guards had to really think you can't touch them, you can't assault them, but you need to stop it when your police can't come in quickly or at all sometimes. So that's it in general. I didn't know I could speak so much, but it's all important, and it can only be done by a community working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemima. And I think you appreciate from the recognition that you've just got from councillors that your coalface experience is things that's really valued. As you said, this issue is not simply one of security. There's a big component of social interaction with these individuals. So again, thanks for your commentary, and I have questions from Councillor Thurston, Councillor Winters and Councillor Needs. Councillor Thurston.
Jemima, thank you for all the great work that you're doing in Tauranga. I'm actually Rotorua based, and as you know, we have our own issues over there.
Yeah.
I know those comments would be shared by my colleagues from Rotorua here today. But just two questions. One, can you just elaborate a little bit more on the culture? Because we're making a lot of very fundamental decisions at the moment about trying to help and fix this problem.
Yes.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the actual culture down there at Willow Street? And secondly, you've talked about a long-term solution, but what are some quick fixes that we as politicians could do here?
Okay. The culture down there at the bus bays, it's a place of hanging out, because those that are making trouble are also trying to make connections as well. A lot of the connections they're meeting down there, especially when it comes to youth, are our people living on the street that have formed their own type of culture of drinking or drugging. Even glue sniffing was a very big thing over the last year. So what you get is, because the youth are feeling outside the community with the general public, they will draw down there and they will start mixing with our adults down there that may not be the best influence. It just happens quite normally. And it's because those adults are taking notice of them, whether it be good or not. It's making those young ones feel like they're part of something. And then you get a passing of alcohol being bought for them by those adults. One of the quick fixes, I really believe, because 60% of what you look like as a security guard and how you hold yourself does the job for you. I really believe, and it's that our guards down there, first of all, need vests, protection vests. It puts them, and it's not a thing that money needs to be spent on, but they need to be feeling like they're doing a protection job, looking like it, and it lifts it a bit. And what it does is, whoever is down there will take a second look, a second glance. I think that's a big thing. That's a quick fix. The other thing, although I don't know how important it is a camera on them. Because when people are looking and they're in trouble, they don't want to be in front of a camera. They will even watch where the cameras are that are already set up down there, and they'll move to an area where they can't be seen. 60% of your job would be having those two things, and it's done. That's the quick fix. And I think I explained the culture down there and just a part of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Winters.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you for your work, both paid and unpaid, down there looking after our community. The question I have is, and we're going to deliberate on this later on today, do you think, we introduced free fares on our buses some time ago, and today we're making a decision as to whether to continue with that or not. Do you think free fares has made the problem worse in terms of those people having the ability to gather or not?
Yes, I do. I watched when there were free fares, our young ones come into the library and they get on the computers. I actually watched them form a fight from the computers, and the buses at the time were free. They had a fight going on at Arataki, that started up. They had one going on at Bayfair, and they tried to get one going Chandler Crossing on the computers. And then what they did was they jumped on the free buses and just went out to those areas, just like that. They're very smart when they need to be, and they're very innovative. Yeah, the bus fares make a big difference. When they haven't got bus fares, like I was sitting downtown last Friday with one of our young ones. I said, boy, why aren't you going on the ball? We haven't got a fare. He couldn't get on the bus to go to Bayfair to see his mates. And Bayfair is the other place where a lot of trouble goes on, as you would know. And they gather there as well. So that stopped them right there. The free bus fares I've seen have been good for other young ones that need to get home. However, it's not, there are more that could use to make bad use of those free bus fares than there are of those that it would be a good advantage and a positive advantage. So definitely does.
Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Oh, thank you, Jemima. I really appreciate your insight. That was fabulous. I've got a couple of questions for clarification. Roughly how many youths do you think we're dealing with that are being disruptive?
Main ones, I would say 15. And when I say disruptive, I mean continuously. They go, that's all they do. The others basically build up by getting pulled in. But I would say 15 that are always down there looking for something going on, looking to make trouble. And then after that, it just gathers into larger groups, only by the mentality or the gang mentality, you might call it, when you get them all together. And then it's just a powerful thing that they feel. And then nobody can, well, I won't say nobody can stop them, but they're very hard thing to manage and control after that point.
Thank you. Then the other issue is it just an issue that we have in the city at the bus stops, or is it wider?
No, I would say it's wider because I have seen some of our youth down here hanging out also in Gate Park. So it seems to be wherever the buses are going to. So you've got Greta, you've got Bayfair. So it's the routes that they can check because a lot of these children are young, like 11, 10 even. They take the cousins. It's places like they can get public transport. So if you follow the public transport route out to Greerton to Bayfair, you will find that in that general pattern, that's where the trouble goes to. Anything outside of that, they have to walk, which a lot of them do. But yeah, I would say the bus route.
But it is a discrete group of young people, yes, that we could put systems in place to help them and perhaps divert them into other.
Yeah, and I find our youth have changed. We need to actually get to know the youth. Before we could do it with sports, and a lot of sports group, and they joined up and gathered together. A lot of our Māori as well were with sports group, and they would encourage it. That used to work before. It doesn't work so much now. The mentality of our youth has changed.
And then just one last question. You mentioned you started your career working for Tauranga City Council in security, and I was a bit uncertain whether the contract that you had was for Tauranga City Council around the civic centre, or was it with the regional council to provide security for the buses? Because we have had, to be frank, we haven't had Tauranga City being willing to come to the party to help us fund the security system. So I'd like to know what the history has been with regard to Tauranga City funding security in the city.
Okay, so I worked for council, and at the time, I was the chief guard, or we used to have 6 guards. So we actually did down the waterfront. We did the bus bays, we did a walk through of part of Devonport Road. So at that time, we had enough guards to be able to do that. Then we were funded by Tauranga Council. And it was I think it was always a very good way of having us always around. Eyes everywhere. The cameras will only see and do so much. But a guard can communicate as well as see and walk. I thought that worked really well. However, that was for other reasons, but it also helped in the community as well. And working in the library and working in chambers, it was council needed that one guard. So at that time I did that. At one time, we had 6 guards, and then it went down to 3 guards. That was all funded by Tauranga Council. We were employed by them.
And do you know why they stopped doing that?
No, I don't. Now I left that to the big wigs and they just sort out all that. But no, I don't. That would be a conversation you'd have to have with them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Councillor Rose, Councillor Von Duddleston, Councillor White, and Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Rose.
Kia ora koutou, ka mihi nui ki a koe, Auntie. Look, thank you, Jemima, for... Look, I just wanted to ask, you were talking about how free fares does impact this. I'll put the question to you, do you think the attitude and the behaviour would change if we got rid of free fares altogether? And also, would you believe that it wouldn't make the situation worse with these young people potentially getting more aggravated and forcing their way on the bus?
No, I don't. These young people will react to a point. You take the fare away, what are they going to do? The haka? You know what I'm saying? It's not. The big thing with them is they take whatever, they're opportunists. Rangatahi are opportunists at the time. And if they're looking for this and that, they'll take whatever opportunity. But no, I don't think that they'll get tipped off. They actually wait for free fares. So they'll wait for the holidays to see if there is, and you can be sure that their mind's already ticking already then. I really believe that taking away those fares will make a positive difference. But at the same time, you also got to make sure that with taking that away, that there's some sort of support for our bus drivers. You can't just take something away and then leave it to happen or whatever. But no, I don't. I think it's a good idea to take those bus fares away. Then they'll just have to do their exercise.
Well, thank you.
Councillor Von.
Thank you.
Von Duddleston.
Thank you, Jemima. An incredibly insightful presentation, and I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. Your insights are a huge help. My question originally was the same as Councillor Neve's with regard to numbers, but I just want to say that what we're discussing today is not about taking away free fares for school children. There is no plan to take the free fares away for the time in the morning when they go to school between 7 and 9 and between 3 and 4:30 when they leave school for the school. So the school bus service per se, but it's to try to prevent those who are not in school from utilising the bus services outside of those key hours. So that's just a clarification that there's some of the comments have led to believe that we're looking at taking them away completely. And
yeah, thank you. I understood it as what you were explaining.
Thank you. But yeah, all I want to say is thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Tēnā koe e whai mō tō whakaro ki a mātou I tēnei rā, kei te mihi atu ki a koe, me koe te hoki te wahine te whai e tō taha, e mihi ana ki a korua. Look, you mentioned, look, it's really good that we tend to take a bird's eye view of the problem and can't see, I guess in some ways, the wood for the trees. What you've done is exposed on the ground the real issues that we are confronting. So thank you for that. You mentioned, these are obviously kids that get very, as you say, opportunists. They certainly build streetwise. But you mentioned as well, there are adults in the mix, and it seems like they fuel the fire as well by feeding alcohol and so on. Now, are these adults, are they sort of on the streets? Are they homeless, or are they prospecting as well?
It's interesting you mentioned the prospecting because that comes into it as well. A lot of them are on the streets, but what you find down at the CBD is that you get transient adults that become familiar with our young ones. And when I say transient, I mean we get people from Rotorua and Hamilton that come over here quite regularly, and they mix. I don't know for what reasons, but they mix with our street people. And they also build relationships with our teams. Our teams seem to draw to them. So when you talk about prospecting, I'm not really aware of that going on. However, I have had a couple of my young ones point out certain people and say, oh, auntie, remember, and you know, that's the way they talk. That does go on down there. Like I said, it's a culture of a lot of things. And the adults that come down and mix with these young ones, they're not always street people either. They're people that are either unemployed, they actually live at a home, some of them have families, and they come down and hang out down there. And they'll smoke and they'll brew and they'll drink with our young ones down there, then they'll go home. And this is regular. I hope like that answered your question.
Yeah, ka roha. Yeah, kia ora.
Councillor McDonald.
Tuatahi, tēnā koe Jemima. Kia koe te marae ki kura, tēnā koe hoki. Thank you, Jemima. I guess you've opened up for us, opened our eyes to really to what's actually happening on the ground. And we've heard it for some time now, and you know, it's a concern for us. I believe it's a festering of a time for us, not just here in Tauranga, but across the motu. We're entering into a phase where this will escalate if we don't do anything about it. So I guess the thing is, what do we do? In a way, it's good that it's come to our attention. When it first came to our attention, I actually wondered whether it was our swim lane, this was our business. But listening to you speaking, we have a responsibility for the well-being of our constituents and our people within our rohe. So I guess for me, you've answered the question, this is our swim lane. You know, and it's a heavy kaupapa. It's a heavy kaupapa for all of us. And I've just been part of a tangihanga where our whānau have lost a member to gang violence. So for me, if we don't look to how we start to nip this in the bud, that escalates to what I've been a part of in the last 48 hours. And it's a hard one. It's a hard one because it's years of building to what it's become. And my colleagues talk about a quick fix. There is no quick fix. There is no quick fix. This is a journey now that we've got to start to turn back what has resulted in our being around the table discussing this going. So for me, this is a good step that all of you at the coalface have come to us to talk to us about how we help to resolve this issue. I mean, because we're not at the coalface, or some of us may be through whānau connections, but some of the decisions we have here, we find difficult to make because we haven't got the knowledge that you have. So thank you for doing that for us. But the thing is now, what I want to ask is, what is your view about, okay, we can look at some quick fixes and you've spoken briefly about them, but then what are the other things we look at to start turning the wheel back to what it should be? And one of the questions I want to ask is, do you think in our responsibility as governors that we should be looking to how we establish places, programs, ideas, and I know some are out there, but you know, do we need more of them to make our community more inclusive of these young people who find that they are not part of the community? Do you think that that would start to help what we look at as well as the quick fixes? Do we create places for them? And so when we talk about free buses, these free buses are used to take those people to the places that we create for them. But we have those discussions with them about what it is that they want, so that we don't create something that we think is good for them, but create something that they think that they could be part of.
Everything you said, perfect, right there, because it is about conversing with them. Sometimes we give to a community what we think they need, and we don't give to them what they need. And you can spend millions, let's talk about money, you can spend millions of dollars giving to a community what you think they need, and all along it does nothing. It's a waste of money. I think exactly what you said. The only way you can find a solution to a problem is to speak to those in the problem. You can't do it from a desk. You can't. The desks are for the numbers when you go away and a bit of a break from the mayhem. But you can't do it unless you talk with them and talk to them. I would like to share one thing. This is the type of problems we're dealing with, and these youth find themselves on the street. There was a college girl, only 15, and she used to dress herself a certain way, with the long eyelashes and lipstick. We have young 14 to 16-year-old girls who sell themselves down at the bus stop after hours. They go to college in the day and they sell themselves at night. This girl was coming to school and she's the most funniest, beautiful young girl, and she has a singing voice like you wouldn't believe. I stayed close to her because the way that she dressed, and I don't always talk a lot to these kids, it's like walking beside them but not having until they're ready. They don't trust nobody, so they ain't going to trust me, and I'm wearing a security guard, you know. It took a long time for them all to call me auntie or fire. First it was, hey miss. That took about 6 months. Then it was, hey fire. And then after that it was maybe a year and a half, hey auntie, with a hug. That's the time I'm talking about. We're forming these relationships. But this young girl, this is the problem, and the deep problem. She came in one day and she was in tears, and she said, auntie, can I talk to you? So I took her upstairs into council's cafe. Her story was this. She has a mother with mental health at home. She has a younger sister, and her father sexually molests both of them. So she stays home so that he won't touch her and sends her sister to school. Now, you wouldn't even know it. She's wearing a smile and everything. She said, auntie, do you think mum knows? In my opinion, I think mum's mental issues keep her safe and protected from something she may know. But I said to the girl, parents don't always know. And I said, what do you think? And she says, I think mum knows. Now, that's the kind of problem. And this, she's not an isolated problem. You got it. And I used to go home and I think, how do we do this? I can't fix it on my own. That's one of the reasons I brought comes here. Because you go home and you almost give up. Because with that, you know, I talked to a social worker and she said, go to the police. That girl just bloody trusted me with that. And then you want me to go to the police? And then the police go and investigate, and then the family members will either call her a liar or not know how to support her. The mother's already got mental health. That girl's going to go home and kill herself. Why would I go to the police? So those kind of things are down there, and it's like a little stir-ball. There's others, I could go into it. And these kids took ages to form that. That's the kind of work I'm talking about. This is not a quick fix, but what would help with the general behaviour down there would be to see people of the community, our guards, walking proud. You know, they don't need a big, what are you doing here? I've watched the guard once, and as soon as some young ones came and sat down at the bus stop, he went over there, and man, if I saw somebody walking at me like that, I'm going to go, fuck off. We weren't even doing that. They ain't even done anything. So you need people, not more people, you need people with skills. You need people with the right skills. You don't even need a whole army of people. But whoever you have down there need to have skills. And then you do, like you said, need a place where our young ones can go. Even if it was a big, huge warehouse, if they knew it was theirs, they'd end up there. But it would have to be monitored so they take nothing in that they shouldn't. So they don't use it as a hangout to get wasted or drunk. So with every good thing that you put in there, you've also got to have the monitoring in some sort of way. Then you've got money being well spent, and you can form budgets at work.
Just one more, Mr. Chair, one more. So the other question I want to ask you then, that it's not just about the what, it's also about the who, and the people that are actually working with these. Definitely. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jemima. I've got one last question, which is frequently raised by our councillors here, and that is the presence of Māori wardens in terms of helping with these societal issues and the security issues. My understanding is they used to frequent or be part of a security detail or had a presence in town. What's your view? Is there opportunity and room for them to come back to, or do you think this can be handled by security detail alone?
Once again, it's having the right people. Our Māori wardens at one time did a fantastic job, and they have during the years. However, in my opinion, it needs a little bit of a refresh. Our Māori wardens need to be chosen carefully, who we do have there. I won't go into detail, but just from what I've seen, once again, the right people, the right Māori wardens.
Kia ora, Jemima. Once again, thank you for your heartfelt commentary, honesty, and the fact that you are one of many who works at the coalface on the street, and you tell us how it really is. So once again, thank you very much. Yes, feel free to sit in the back and listen to the debate. Right, thank you, councillors. If I move on the agenda, item 4, items not on the agenda, there are none. Order of business, there's no change to the order of business. Declarations of conflict of interest. I don't believe there are any, councillors. No. Verbal presentation. So I want to move quickly to page 9 of your agenda, which is deliberations, overview of the annual plan deliberations process. Namuta, could you just take us through this, because this is really a procedural thing that sets the scene for today, and it shouldn't take us long at all. The considerations of this will follow the next agenda item. Yes.
Good morning, councillors. You can flip through to the next. So today is the annual plan deliberations, which is an ultimate step for the annual plan this year. The agenda for today involves, first of all, an overview of the overall process, the key items, then the safety and security of bus services following on from the presentation heard, statements of proposal related to changes to policies, transport and urban planning, and then financial overview of applications. So, as I mentioned, today is a penultimate meeting following 4 annual plan workshops over the past 6 months. Once you've provided guidance on deliberations today, staff will action in that direction and prepare the final annual plan as well as related policies, which will be adopted on the 23rd of June. Just confirming that date has been brought forward from the 29th, 30th of June to the 23rd of June. So in terms of content, safety and security of bus services today, we'll talk about security arrangements at the interchange, fees free. Statements of proposal will consider fees and charges policy, the revenue and financing policy, the rates for emission and postponement policy, and joining a regional shared sector organisation. And then in transportation and urban planning, we will discuss the transport emissions reduction plan, hydrogen bus conversion, and on-demand services. I'll now hand over to Muna, who will handle the first substantive item of the day.
Through the chair, I'll just invite our partners to come up as well, as we're all talking to this item.
Councillor Lees.
Just a question. I just want to clarify that this isn't a statement of proposal to our annual plan that we're dealing with. This is an internal submission from staff to make policy changes to policies that we set in our previous annual plan and long-term plan process. Is that right?
Morning, Untitled councillors. So that under the Local Government Act, there isn't a requirement to make internal and external submissions. This is a paper to this council to make decisions on. There isn't a need to define it as an internal submission, but if you can think of that in terms of the RMA settings.
My point is that this is deliberations on our annual plan, but happy to accept the fact that staff are putting this before us because I think this is important.
Thank you, Namoto. So if you'd like to introduce it, then I'll make some opening comments and we'll deal with the presenters, which you can introduce as individuals.
Okay. So tēnā koutou council.
Excuse me, Councillor Brunning.
Yes, I'd just like clarification. It might seem a bit academic, but if we make a decision here today, but someone wanted to make a challenge on the final day, would that require a 2/3 to change it, or would that just be the normal 50% over 50%?
Through the chair, if you're reversing a resolution at a new meeting, we need 50%, but in the same meeting, we need 2/3. So, yeah.
Can we have that repeated for us on Zoom, because that was distorted and I didn't get a clear hearing.
My apologies. Through the chair, if you are wanting to reverse resolution at the same meeting, you need 2/3 majority to do so. If you do it at a new meeting, the rationale being you could have had new information in the meantime, the normal majority resolution applies.
Tēnā koutou councillors. So we're here today to talk to you all about improving the safety and security, particularly in relation to our bus services. So that's the paper that you have in front of you. I did want to thank our partners who are here today so that we can jointly and collectively talk about all of our efforts to address safety and security, particularly in relation to bus services. So I will introduce everyone, do a quick overview of the paper, and then hand over to the presenters. So we have from New Zealand Police, Clifford Paxton, from NZ Bus, Jay Zamiski. From Tauranga City Council, we have Nick Johansson and Paul Mason, and from Waka Kotahi, we have Michelle Te Whārua. So before I hand over to the speakers, I did just want to quickly highlight what we've got in the paper. It outlines all of the actions that Regional Council are undertaking to look at how we can address safety and security concerns for our bus services, and the immediate actions that we've taken include changing and increasing our security services at Willow Street and Bayfair, and you'll be aware that change happened on the 16th of May. We are working with our partners to try and move the CBD interchange here at Willow Street to Durham Street as quickly as possible. And I do acknowledge that in that move as quickly as possible, we may not be able to meet our normally high standards in terms of logistics and timetables, but we will absolutely do our very best, and that will rely on staff being well. So we've ramped up security. We're looking at moving the CBD interchange very quickly, and as part of your deliberations paper, as part of your paper today, we are seeking you to consider the costs of that relocation. We are seeking guidance from you in terms of the approach to free fares, and seeking your guidance as to whether to consider reducing the trial for free fares for school students to just before, for children, just before and after school. So that direction and guidance we're seeking from you today. And so in addition to the increased security, the CBD move, the guidance from you in terms of free fare trial for children, and the reduction in hours, we've also added to all of our urban buses codes of conduct. So expectations in terms being really clear in terms of how bus users and passengers are expected to act on bus services. So those are some of the immediate things that we've done and the guidance that we're seeking from you today. Now I would, through the chair, like to hand over to our presenters.
Thank you, Namuta. So just before you do, I'll make some opening comments in terms of setting the scene. And I've asked staff to make a provision to have you all sitting up there at the presenters table today for a specific purpose. So as Lamuta said, we've got a problem in front of us, and that's the primary thing that we need to try and get some resolution to. So what is the problem? The problem is antisocial behaviour is one aspect. The next problem is criminal behaviour that falls into two categories. One's under the Crimes Act and the other is under the Summary Proceedings Act. And they require different approaches because they're different elements of seriousness. The primary interest we're endeavouring to address, or we need to address, is the safety of staff in terms of the provision of services, safety of the patrons who utilise that service, and the safety of members of the general public who might want to pass through or frequent the areas where this antisocial and criminal behaviour takes place. And we need to ensure the safety of the transport network. As you heard Jemima say, the reality is the mobility that's currently offered to some of these people means that it's not just one or two particular locations, it's several using the network. I've asked you to all come up here to represent your individual agencies on that the resolution to this is no one agency. This is not a witch hunt to the police department or whomever. This will require a multifaceted approach where, as Namuta said, we have to join up in partnership to address the immediate issues as well as the longer term societal issues. And we can only do that collectively. As I said, it's not a blame game. There is a partnership required here. And I repeat again, they're the immediate issues that need resolution and they're the longer term issues that Jemima referred to. So the immediate issues, as I said, are those behavioural issues that need intervention, and the events of the last week in particular. And I refer to events probably 12 months ago where we had that elderly lady who was severely injured in the bus network. They cannot continue. And that sort of behaviour needs intervention. Short, sharp intervention. Make no apologies for that. And if you don't do that, it won't work. The longer term issues in terms of addressing the societal problems that may well lead to these outcomes, there's a much longer fix. And there probably are agencies outside the agency sitting in this room who will have to be brought into that discussion. So I look forward to your presentations. I'll leave further commentary to my council colleagues, and I'll make some closing comments at the end. And hopefully we'll get a resolution in terms of the way forward. Mamuta.
So through the chair, the order of presenters we've got is we'll start with Clifford in terms of NZ Police, then we'll go to Jay for NZ Bus, we'll go to Tauranga City Council, and then Waikakotahi.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I just wonder, through you, Chair, can we just be very, very clear on our current policy with regards free fares for children 18 and lower? Because I just think we need to be very clear. We had offered free fares for school children who generally use the school service. And then we had offered on a trial basis in conjunction and partnership with Waikakotahi, that's my understanding, free fares on our other services for those 18 and lower at all times. Have I got that right?
So through the chair, it is free fares for children 18 and lower, 7 days a week, all times.
Thank you.
So I'll hand over to Clifford in terms of NZ Police.
Kia ora koutou, ko Clifford Paxton Home, Area Commander, Western Bay Police, Western Bay Bentley Police. Please go just acknowledge Regional Chair, councillors, Bay Bentley Regional Council employees, our partners, and members of the public. Also, I just want to acknowledge, I'm here this morning to speak in regards to the free buses, and I acknowledge the multiplicity of issues and complexity of issues with our youth currently, and I think the previous speaker spoke on that. But from my perspective, the issues that we're seeing currently are not without precedent. If we cast our mind back 18 months or 2 years previous, similar issues were experienced at Bayfair, Arataki, with youth travelling from all over the city, Tauranga, Western Bay, plenty for free-range flights. A significant alarm was caused in the community at that time, particularly Arataki, culminating in a temporary base being established adjacent to the Bay Fair over the December-January 2021 period. Meetings were established with our partners, including the Regional Council, and free buses were then restricted from that point. The issues and concerns from our perspective are anticipated. Since then, we've seen free buses reintroduced more widely, and we've seen an escalation in antisocial behaviour, particularly amongst our youth. Initially, it began after school hours at Willow Street, but from there, growing issues to include Farm Street, but also the school holidays, and most recently over the weekend. Police deployments to Willow Street have seen youth in numbers get on the bus back to Farm Street, and when we travel to Farm Street, for them to get back on the bus and travel back to Willow Street. So the issues initially were after school at Willow Street, but growing issues through Farm Street and the school holiday periods and the weekends. Recently, we've seen a reduction in antisocial behaviour at Willow Street and an escalation at Farm Street, and maybe by putting a resource into Willow Street, some of the issues have been displaced. Ultimately, these youth have free rein of our city, their behaviours impacting on those legitimately going about their business, and the free buses are enabling poor behaviour to continue. Most of these youth are in the younger brackets. They don't have the money or resources to move about the city at will. By preventing that movement, they won't have the ability to congregate, intimidate, and offend against those who are legitimately trying to go about their business. Trying to continue to respond to this is never going to fix the problem, because if not this group, there'll be another group. We need to prevent the ability to move about the city at will. We've seen some work being done at Willow Street with the move to Durham Street, and that may help with reduction in conflict that currently occurs. For those that are generally trying to move from one part of the city to the other, those attempting to access the art gallery, other businesses, those that are wanting to use the bus, and those that are there for no other purpose than to be seen in the moment of notoriety. Certainly the move of the bus stop will remove some of that conflict that is occurring, but won't fundamentally change the ability of our youth to move about the city at will. I can also say that whilst the focus on some of the antisocial behaviours of these youth has come to the fore, there's also a degree of vulnerability that we need to be aware of. A number of the youth in younger age bracket, 12 to 14 years, both male and female, socialising with much older youth and adults, where alcohol and other substances are being supplied. We also need to be mindful of their safety and the exposure that they are getting. The free buses are a key factor in enabling or facilitating the antisocial behaviour that is occurring. But without it, they won't have the ability to move about the city at will. As alluded to earlier, trying to continue to respond to this is never going to fix the problem. Because if it's not going to be this group, then it'll be another group. And we need to prevent the ability to move about the city at will. Free buses are being used for purposes other than intended, and they need to be restricted to the purposes intended. That is, getting to and from school to ensure the ongoing safety of other users and members of our community. Thank you.
You Inspector. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I am exercised by what you say because I have a report in front of me which has been commissioned by Acorn on youth 2022 in the Western Bay. It's a vital signs report, and it highlights all of the issues that our youth are facing at the moment. It's incredibly well researched, and there's a lot of priorities in here. What concerns me is that one of the top priorities is that transport solutions to improve access to trade, employment, recreational activities and wellbeing services is a priority for youth. What you're suggesting is that we restrict ease of access to the wider youth, and we have over 230,000 trips taken on our free services for the sake of a few 15 to 30 young people that are causing problems. So I'm very, very frustrated because we actually put this free fare scheme in place for Tauranga to help address congestion and to also improve access for youth and to help families out that were really struggling to get their kids to and from school because of the cost of the bus fares. So whether or not we have an issue with a group of young people who are socially disruptive, I really struggle with the fact that a wider group of the community, particularly a group of youth for whom transport is a high priority, are going to be restricted. So my question is, can you tell us, are there any routes that we could change our approach to rather than reduce free fares? For example, if you can tell us that it's generally between 4:30 and 6, and it's between Bayfair and Tauranga CBD, could we potentially have a warden on the bus to ensure that those young people are controlled and managed adequately, rather than completely penalising all those kids that are after school, trying to get home from after school activities, who will now have to pay because of the recommendation that we're cutting our free services?
There's a multitude of points there that you've raised, but can I say, at the end of the day, the behaviour of some of these youth is impacting more widely on the community at large. So whether it's other bus users or members of the community legitimately going about their business, they are being impacted upon it. The question, I guess, would be is for those that have legitimate purpose in terms of using the bus, is there another way that that can be provided or supported? Because at the moment, as I say, you've got those taking advantage of free buses moving about the city at will, impacting on other members of our community.
You can't tell me if there's particular routes and times that we could be doing different things.
Look, there's particular times, obviously, that are peaks for us, and so you're talking about predominantly between 3 and say 5:30 at Farm Street, between 3 and 6:30 at Willow Street. It tends to peak during the week, but as we've seen recently, that isn't isolated. We're seeing significant issues through the school holidays generally, and also at weekends. And I'll just say that there's a couple of aspects to that. One is around demand or calls for service, and so that's where we're seeing significant disturbances regularly. But then you also have the other aspect of it is around the seriousness of offending, and some of that is occurring outside of those hours after school.
Thank you, Councillor Neese. Councillor Thurston.
Officer, as a representative of Rotorua at this table and a previous chair of public transport, one of the driving forces, as my colleague has just stated, in initiating a lot of these services for the people of Tauranga was to get Tauranga moving, and it was never ever entitled to be a social service initiative. It was effectively to take pressure off the very stressed infrastructure that you have in Tauranga. So I totally agree with everything that the previous speaker has said. An earlier speaker today made reference to the fact that we're dealing with a hard core of 15 individuals, and the thing that really gives me grief is that the good people of Tauranga are going to be penalised on the basis of the unruly behaviour of 15 individuals plus. But can you just elaborate a little bit more, Officer, in terms of the police's position in terms of the increase in antisocial and criminal behaviour, and how you guys, well, I shouldn't say that, and how the police believe that it's directly attributed to free buses for up to 18-year-olds that we're providing?
Okay, so there's a couple of points in relation to that. As I say, if I go back to what I said initially around the precedent of free buses, when we saw pre-arranged fights occurring over at Bayfair some 18 months to 2 years ago, what we saw in that particular case was a number of different youth involved from a number of different schools who formed a collective on the basis of their school. And so they're coming together in moments of conflict based on their allegiance to their particular areas or particular schooling. That was from a number of different areas of the city, and you're talking about quite significant numbers. And so if you get 20 or 30 from each school, you've got a number of different schools, you're talking about significant numbers. What we're also seeing in the youth arena is when pressure is applied to one group, yes, that might slow that one group down for a period of time, but a new group will then come to the fore. And it's something we're seeing in a number of different areas within that youth fraternity at the moment. So I have no doubt at the end of the day that we can apply pressure to this particular group, we can slow this group down, there'll be another group that will then establish themselves.
So, Chair, just a supplementary, clearly the police know the specific schools in Tauranga that are breeding grounds for these individuals. Can you share with us what level of interaction you are having with boards of trustees and principals of those particular schools in Tauranga as at today?
I think it's quite unfair to suggest that it's related to a school. When we've seen some of these issues previously, there's a multiplicity of schools involved. And so I think if we refer back to the previous speaker, some of this stuff is done at a particular time where they'll pre-arrange these things and they'll come from all different parts of the city. So inevitably, if you wanted to go down that path, you'll be talking to all schools. And at the end of the day, what is the ability of them to influence behaviour outside of school hours?
Thank you, Councillor White.
E te rangatira no te prihimana he mihana ki a koe. Look, thank you for your presentation, and I just thinking about your comment that this has happened in the past, or patterns like this have happened in the past, but obviously with heightened tensions around COVID and the impacts, that's probably heightened all the tensions. One of the things that strikes me in listening to our previous speaker from the community who suggested, you know, that removing the fares would go sort of provide some immediate relief, if you like. And I'm suggesting probably that's maybe what you might be suggesting is some relief, given this, that there are a lot of resources that are quite strapped at the moment to deal with the ideals that have been expressed around the table, around everybody enjoying the service and everybody being able to still have that access. Right now, there's a big problem, and unless we give some respite or relief, it will be very difficult to contain that problem. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, absolutely. And so what we're talking about this morning is trying to restrict that ability to move around the city at will, to reduce that conflict that is occurring at these particular places, which is around the bus stops. As was alluded to in terms of the previous speaker, that's not going to fix the multiplicity of issues we're seeing currently in terms of some of our youth. That's something that's going to require significant work to be able to address that. And look, from my personal perspective, there's probably a number of factors that are at play at the moment. Through the COVID period, we saw that youth that were already on the fringes of the school system, no longer going to school, schools closing down, restricting access, and through that we've probably cemented some new behaviours. I think it's reasonably common knowledge within the media there's a significant percentage of our youth that are not attending school. We have to accept that. On top of that, you've got a number of agencies that are directly involved with our youth retrenching through that period, where there's a case of working from home, whether it's restricted services, whether it's refocusing their activities through that period, which is also a factor, I believe. And the final thing that we've got that seems to be driving some of the behaviours is the parents having to work long hours to be able to pay the rent or food on the table, parents working a number of jobs, long hours, and perhaps some of our youth not getting the supervision that they once got. And on addition to that, some parents, for whatever reason, absolving themselves of the responsibility. The fact that we've got 12 to 14-year-olds hanging around at the bus stop without supervision is a concern.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Rose.
Kia ora koutou. Ka mihi nui ki a koe, Clifford. Good to see you. Hey, look, I've got a couple of partai. From your guys' opinion, from the police's opinion, how have you worked with other organisations like the likes of Oranga Tamariki and Iwi in regards to this situation? And if not, have you worked with them? And the other question I had, and I asked the previous speaker this, do you believe that we will see an increase in antisocial behaviour if we were to get rid of free fares, i.e. some of these young people trying to force their way onto the bus?
So I guess just in terms of your first question, so the work, we're talking about the buses specifically, the work that's been done at the moment has been with ourselves, New Zealand Bus, the Union, Regional Council and TCC. And so that's the work that's been going on for probably a good year or more now in terms of how do we create a safe environment for our communities and our commuters. The additional stuff, I guess, post that is when we start to deal with the youth Then obviously we move into the realms of Wairanga Tamariki and others, so that's a little bit post that. But our focus for myself currently has been around those partnerships to try and create a safe environment for our bus stops. And as I say, I think we've achieved some success in that area until recently when we've reintroduced the free buses. In terms of your second question, there's always going to take a period to change some behaviours. So behaviour change doesn't occur overnight, but I think the key around behaviour change is education. Once we inform our communities of the expectations, the majority will comply with that. There might be a few at the fringes that will need to take some added extra effort with, but the majority will comply with that. So I have no doubt that if it is to change, there'll have to be a period of education. For the most part, most would comply. There'll be some that will need to put in some extra efforts, I suspect.
Yes, thank you. 3 questions, if I may. Could you just describe what the current truancy law is? Secondly, who do you believe has the duty of care for disruptive social behaviour at or near bus stops? And thirdly, are these youths, we heard from Jemima about 15, known to the police? Thank you.
Sorry, just the last question.
Are the 15 or so core group of disruptors known to the police?
So the truancy law obviously is in relation to those that are of school age and required to attend school. I think it's been reasonably well socialised within the community at large that there's some significant issues in relation to that, and some of the numbers in terms of those not in attendance or not in regular attendance at school are quite significant. You're not talking about a small number of people. In terms of a duty of care, ultimately that I suspect that falls on a number of different groups, a number of different partners, depending on what the requirements of that are. Parents have a duty of care in regards to their children. As a community, we have a duty of care. TCC will have a role in it. Plenty of regional council will have a role in it, and police will have a role in it. And depending on where it sits, I guess it will dictate which agency has a lead in that. No different, I guess, in terms of New Zealand Bus. As employers, we have a duty under the Health and Safety Employment Act to provide a safe environment for our employees. We all have responsibilities, and that's part of that group that we've been meeting with for some time now, is in terms of just trying to make sure that collectively we try and manage this challenge that we've got currently. In terms of the current group, the question, I guess, is what is a group? Because what you've got, I guess, is a core number of people that, yes, are known to us, and a number of others that are associated with that. As I said earlier, that's at this time, this week. Next week, it'll be something different. Once we start to apply some pressure, we'll get a reaction to that. We'll start to slow that particular group down, and a new group will form. I have no doubt about that.
If I may, just a follow-up question, 2 questions. Who is the lead agency for enforcement of truancy law? And secondly, thank you for your response about duty of care. Am I right in taking from your response that Tauranga City Council have a duty of care along with other organisations with regards to this safety issue?
So in terms of truancy, my understanding is Blue Light's got a role in truancy in New Zealand, and it's obviously supported by a number of different agencies as well, including ourselves. We have a role in that. And as I say, I think it's been well socialised that that's seen as a priority nationally. It's not unique to us here in the Western Bay of Plenty. In terms of, sorry, the second question, there was a lead agency in relation to.
No, I was just seeking confirmation from your comments around duty of care. What I heard you say was that the Tauranga City Council also have a duty of care along with other organisations with regards safety to the public at or near bus stops or those public places.
When we talk about duty of care, I guess we get into the area of negligence and the like, but I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day is there's a number of partners or parties involved. And I think it's reasonably well accepted that TCC provide the infrastructure, regional council, the buses, We have a role in terms of community safety. There's a number of different parties involved. Now, whether we get into the legal intricacies of that or not, I guess is a different story, but I think it's reasonably well accepted that we all share a responsibility in that, and I certainly haven't felt any resistance from the partners at the meetings that I've been involved in regards to that.
Councillor Von Duddleson.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Paxton. Can I thank police for the positive reinforcement that you've given to myself and regional council staff, Tauranga City staff, over a long period of time to actually mitigate when we have a problem. And this has escalated once again. It's not new, but it's great that you're at the table and willing to share it with us. What I want to be clear on is whether or not you share the desire of our regional council not to actually stop all free school buses, but those that aren't directly related to and from school services. Because the last thing I want to see is our children having more reason not to attend school. We do have a high truancy rate at this time, and I'm sure COVID has exacerbated that. But it's really important that we try to get these kids back to school, and there's no one fix all, but I just want to know whether police would support us still retaining a free service to and from school. As far as support work, for 10 years, I was a trustee and treasurer for Te Aranui Youth Trust, which worked closely with police on youth at risk. And the support that police have given that organisation has been fantastic. And I believe we need to bring in that sort of social service. We can't rely on someone else, leaving it to someone else to do things. We actually need to get a broad brush approach, and so I'm sure you'll support the continuation of that type of service. But this is a wide-ranging problem that goes way beyond just buses. And if you could just clarify for me on the school service itself, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have no objection to that whatsoever. I mean, I think it's an absolutely legitimate purpose for school children to be able to get to and from school as required. It's just a question of for what is the tenure post-school that's required to enable them to get back home again.
Thank you, Clifford. Councillor McDonald, last question.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have my question answered through the duty of care question by Councillor Thompson. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Namuta.
Through the chair, our next presenter is Jay from NZ Bus.
Jay.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present at this meeting. So my name's Jay Zniewski, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at NZ Bus, and we obviously operate the bus services in Tauranga as well as Auckland and Wellington. From the outset, I'd like to confess that I migrated from Australia 2.5 years ago to work for NZ Bus, so I won't pretend to be an expert on crime prevention in Tauranga. But I have dealt with antisocial and criminal behaviour by use at previous bus companies I've worked at both in Sydney and regional New South Wales. It's fair to say in my 22 years in the bus industry, I haven't seen antisocial and criminal behaviour from youths to this extent that we're experiencing in Tauranga. We certainly don't see it in Auckland and Wellington, and certainly not in Sydney, where I was prior to coming over to New Zealand. It did happen, just not to this extent. I'll make that clear. Personally, I still recall the effects of antisocial behaviour when I drove buses early in my career on Sydney's northern beaches. It makes you feel sick in the stomach, and you realise very quickly that you're on your own and no longer in control of the situation. So even though I'm part of the management team at NZ Bus, I certainly have that experience of what it's like on the front line and the feelings and emotions our drivers and workforce will be going through when they encounter these incidents out on the road. basically cast a pall on what's otherwise a really enjoyable job. You generally get to meet people like Jemima, who are an absolute pleasure to interact with when you drive a bus, and it's very easy to make someone's day waiting for people running for the bus and getting to them where they need to go. As well as the toll this takes on our drivers, there's also the impact of the rest of the community, as drivers are often too shaken or injured to continue, which often lasts for more than a day. So to put that in context, the service can be cancelled on Monday because of an incident that happened the previous Friday, as the driver often requires extended time off to recover following the incident, especially where a physical or mental injury has occurred. We are in an environment where driver availability is already impacted by COVID and an industry-wide driver shortage. Incidents like these seriously hamper our ability to market the role of a bus driver. And even aside from the recruitment aspect, there's a real risk that our existing drivers won't want to deal with this on an ongoing basis and will have a retention issue. These years have been cutting our seats, burning floor coverings, melting window laminate, and graffitiing basically all parts of the bus inside and out. I can honestly say that we deal with having to fix vandalism on our buses on a daily basis at this point in time. And obviously, just like drivers, there's the real risk of trips not operating while buses are unavailable for service while these repairs are carried out. I would actually like to thank Council for your response today. Your support in providing security on the ground and the ongoing monitoring of these arrangements has been excellent and greatly appreciated by NZ Bus Management and the staff on the ground. And as we've acknowledged, it certainly did fix the problem for a while. I suppose the crux of the issue is that the security guards no longer appear to be sufficient. And I would echo the words of the chairman in the fact that I think we need a two-stage approach. There is a longer game to fix these wider social issues at play here. There's also something I think we very much need to do short term to deliver that confidence back to drivers that they can stop and pick up the people who are doing the right thing and just trying to get from A to B. So I would really appreciate, obviously, an affirmative response from the police in the short term. What I've experienced before, not so much with youth, is obviously police have been in a position where they've ridden the bus, they've flagged buses, pulled them over, asked if there's any troublemakers on the bus, remove those people from the bus. So there's lots of initiatives that can happen from a proactive point of view from the police. On the subject of free fares for children, I acknowledge the best intentions of council to give everyone in the community the best opportunity to access public transport. And also, of course, there's cities and communities around the world which are considering free public transport for everyone going forward. So one way or another, the policing of antisocial and criminal behaviour may have to exist. So we may have to consider that in the future. Though I certainly think in the interim, based on what I've read on the report, the comments of Jemima, the police, and I believe feedback from Waikato Regional Council, that it appears to be an effective short-term solution for at least slowing down the amount of incidents we are currently having. From NZ Bus's point of view, it is obviously we provide specific training for our drivers on how to de-escalate situations wherever possible. That's probably one of the most proactive things we can do. But unfortunately, a lot of the other actions we do take are retrospective and after the event, which is obviously what we're aiming to avoid. But we do have CCTV footage on board all our buses. We try to obtain that footage as quickly as we can for the police, so they can obviously identify these offenders, which, as you've heard, some of them aren't known to the police. We have a 24/7 control room who have GPS visibility over all the buses. So there's a distress button on board every bus. Straight through our control centre, we're obviously coordinating emergency response as soon as possible. But once again, of course, it takes a reasonable amount of time, of course, for the police to arrive on the scene, and it can often be too late and the damage is already done. So I think that's all I've got to say before questions. But as I said, very much appreciate council's and police's attention on this matter, and we'll do whatever we can as a bus operator to assist.
Thank you, Jay. And the thing I took out of that commentary, which is really a sad indictment on where we've got to as a community, is that in your experience, coalface experience, bus driver, exposure nationally and internationally, this is the worst you've seen.
It is unfortunate.
So therein lies the challenge for us to fix it. Councillor Neese.
Thank you very much, Jay. I guess the question I've got is, having travelled overseas, and I've seen examples of where there have been ongoing security issues, and the bus services have additional measures in place. So I'd like to ask whether you think they're warranted in this instance, and the instance I'm talking about are like cages around drivers. I don't know what to call them, maybe bouncers at the door to prevent anybody that is looking like they're going to be troublemakers from actually getting on the bus. And also having, I don't know, like the whole air marshals thing, where on at-risk routes you've got somebody that's actually there, perhaps incognito, that can step in to provide additional support to the drivers. Now, I ask you this because I accept we've got a duty of care, both to the drivers of the buses and to the people that are using the buses. And to be honest, I am worried that reducing free fares is not going to be solving the problem. I think we're still going to have the problem. So my question to you is, are there other things that you think we should be doing as a regional council to help try and keep your bus drivers safe?
Very good question. Thank you, Councillor. I would like to start with obviously some sort of increased compliance presence, whether that be through the police or another option. Some of the things you mentioned there, such as putting drivers in cages, as you know, under the Health and Safety Act, we consult with our workforce quite often, and the overwhelming response generally is that drivers don't want to be behind cages. You're right, they definitely don't want to experience antisocial behaviour, but it's sort of acknowledging that we'll put the driver in a jail cell because we can't manage what's happening on the other side of the fence. And absolutely, I'm aware of some of those companies overseas that, unfortunately, the situation has gotten that bad that they've had to resort to that. But I would hope to think that that was a very last resort, just because it will, it hurts the amenity of how the driver feels when he or she's driving the bus. But yeah, I think that all those other initiatives you mentioned are absolutely worthwhile considering. An increased presence in and around those bus stops with people with the right authority, hopefully goes a good way to solving the issue.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Amanda.
So through the chair, our next speakers are Tauranga City Council. So we've got both Nick and Paul.
Kia ora tātou, ko Nick Johansson aho, I'm General Manager Infrastructure for Tauranga City Council. And between Paul Mason and myself, we're going to talk about our role in the partnership. And indeed, the partnership is needed, as Jemima pointed out to us, the specialist skills that are needed to solve these issues. You'd be forgiven to think, unless you happen to hear that this is an infrastructure problem or a security problem or a bus service problem, but it's obviously much bigger than that, and hence the partnership of lots of different skill sets at the table. And sadly, we now have a unity of purpose in shifting the central bus station as quickly as possible. We had struggled to find a common date for that up until recently, where we were motivated by the demolition of the Willow Street campus to shift as quickly as possible. Now we have a unity of purpose there, and I truly hope that can be a circuit breaker and the security aspect of running the service. Comments have been made about the Tauranga City Council's obligation or responsibility in terms of security, and I would just like to underline that the absolute fact that we see ourselves as carrying responsibility in that or accountability in that space, and I will talk about the infrastructure component of that, and Paul will talk about the social component of that. And from an infrastructure perspective, we're really leaning into the infrastructure services that we provide on the new Durham Street site, with increased lighting, additional cameras. We're removing darkened or shaded areas, security area with screens to oversee the whole area from slightly remotely, obviously where the security guards can have their smoker and have their sort of the breaks during their duties. So from an infrastructure perspective, absolutely, we have a responsibility for the provision of security and in an infrastructure sense, they're the sort of things that we're looking at. And I'll hand over to Paul, maybe to talk about the social issues.
So Paul Mason, as Nick said, and I sit in the safety and resilience area at Southern City Council. So just to let you know, I've been working closely with Simon Gray from Regional Council over the last 18 months with our regular city safety forum meetings we have. And that's facilitated by us, but attended by Regional Council Police at area response manager level as a senior sergeant. What we do in those meetings is we look at the reports each week that are provided by Simon from Regional Council, and we make sure that they're responsive, that we've got good communication with police, with our Tauranga Traffic Operations Centre, which is CCTV, just ensuring that our information is provided timely and anything that needs to be addressed is addressed quickly. So we've enhanced a lot of communication over the time around that, and it's still a continual improvement all the time depending on what's happening. That group we find really positive, responsive to what we're doing, and I think it's been really successful and continues to be. What we're looking at doing is working closely, obviously, with the change in security company. And one of the things, a comment I'll make there is around probably the enhanced engagement response that's proposed. In my opinion, it's that's invaluable, as we've heard from previous speakers. The whole idea of this approach is really, we can say no till the cows come home, but it's about getting to know, put a K and a W on it. It's about getting to know the people involved and looking at what other supports we can put in place. So in doing that too, what we're talking to Simon about is some additional training potentially to the current security around engagement with youth, and also around supports that they can provide through some social providers that we were going to assist with and speak to them around that. Also, just in recent times, as part of our catch-ups and meetings, we've been talking to the police youth services around engaging with rangatahi youth providers in the area and bringing their expertise to the table, because we need that there, and that's looking probably a more medium long-term approach. But we certainly need to get, we'll be looking at infrastructure, environmental and situational issues. But at the end of the day, we need to address the drivers to this as well. And I know that's more medium to long term, but that's very important as well.
Thank you, Paul. Councillors, questions? Paul, Councillor Nees.
Thank you very much, Paul. We heard from Jemima that Tauranga City Council used to fund a security contract within CBD, that they had 6 staff that used to move around the Civic Library Centre and around the city, and that she doesn't know why that was stopped. Now, I know that as a regional council, we have asked many times for some contribution to the security system that we have put in place for the bus stops, because we believe that infrastructure is a Tauranga City Council responsibility. You're talking about lighting, etc., but I guess some of us believe that you have a duty of care to help fund the security details. So can you explain why you do not want to fund that or help us fund that?
I can speak to what I believe what previously happened through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding was that the security at the time, when it was first instigated, actually New Tech Security were involved in both because they were TCC's supplier at the time. They were looking after the TCC campus, I understand, just the campus only. And then Regional Council obviously engaged New Tech to look after the bus area. So there definitely was an interaction between because it was obviously one company, but my understanding was that that security for the campus was engaged by TCC, but the security for buses was Regional Council.
So now we're going back to New Tech. My question still stands. Would you consider helping fund the security to keep people safe on the streets of Tauranga near the bus interchanges?
Yeah, well, I guess to use Councillor McDonald's analogy before of sticking to your swimming lane, and I guess from Tauranga City Council's perspective, that's exactly what we do by the infrastructure service provision that I mentioned earlier. And the agreement is such that there's an operational, bus service component, and Tauranga City's view is that the security component of that in terms of staffing is an operational bus service operational cost, and Tauranga City provides the infrastructure to support any security that is infrastructure related. Whether we then should put, ratepayers' money towards something that's actually not our obligation, I guess that's a tricky conversation to have. We've been over this between commissioners, executive, and ourselves, and trying to sort of see what is the right thing to do here in terms of security provision. That's where we have landed. I have hot off the press in conversations with the Commission just last night that they see maybe an opportunity to offer some financial support, developing and sort of a cost share arrangement during the interim arrangement, while I guess the bus service is sorted out in terms of costs and free fares, etc. And I understand now that's a date that's shifted from July to come forward a little bit.
So through the chair, just to confirm, the paper includes a date of, depending on what your decision is today, or what the direction and guidance you give us in relation to free fares, how quickly we can move. The paper talks about 1 July. We've worked really hard and jumped many queues to be able to try and pull that forward to Queen's Birthday weekend in June. So that's the new date you're looking at now.
Yeah, so up until that date, there is an offer of some cost share arrangement developing for those security services.
Councillors, so Nick, thanks for those comments. This will obviously be an ongoing discussion with the commissioners, but I think it's important that, given what we've heard today, the siloed approach in terms of that's your role, this is my role, we need to really question. The comments from Jay are telling in terms of the size and the scale of the problem that we face. And we can't sit in our respective silos. If you want to fix this problem, it's a bit like the boat's got a hole in it. You can talk as much as you like, but someone's got to stick their finger in the hole to stop the water coming in. Major.
So through the chair, our next speaker is Michelle from Waka Kotahi. Over to you, Michelle.
Kia ora koutou, Mr. Chair and councillors, ko Michelle Aho. I'm representing Waka Kotahi, and David Spears sends his apologies, he was not available today. So we're supporting safety through being a funding partner. So currently, my understanding is we are helping provide a 51% contribution to the security, which has been funded for the interchanges at the CBD at Willow Street and at Gretton and at Bayfair. So, we want to be a partner and sit at the table, and that's a lever that we can help with at the moment. Thank you.
Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Winters.
For the record, Mr. Chairman, saddened to hear Tauranga CC being in their swim lane. They don't see it as their responsibility in providing funding for security, because in Rotorua, Rotorua District Council provides the funding for the city ambassadors to walk and patrol our CBD. Simple as that. Can I implore you to go back to your commissioners and say, it's your words, Matty Minor, we have a responsibility, we, Tauranga City Council, have a responsibility to be in this swim lane, along with us, and along with Waka Kotahi. Thank you. This is all of our problems. You just can't blame it on one agency to fix Police, thank you for your involvement. But TCC, you've got to be there as well.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. Councillors, anything else? Councillor McDonald.
I want to agree with Kevin, and I guess just to put some context into my being quoted by TCC staff. When I use the term about sticking to our swim lane, and I see your interpretation of your swim lane, I agree you need to revisit the responsibility of your swim lane. This is bigger than determining who has responsibility for infrastructure. This is about our society and the changes needed within our society and the responsibility that we have as councils to provide for that for our constituents. Clarify why I use that term and the context of it. Hilda.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, councillors, so if I can just make some...
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Von Duddleson.
Yeah, and Councillor Rose after me,
Rose.
too, please. Look, I know we talk about swim lanes and whatever, but we don't want to get into a blame game here between the two. I think we're starting to see some really good collaboration between Tauranga City and the Regional Council with regards to Tauranga's public transport. There is real goodwill between the councillors and the commissioners, and that is starting to permeate between staff as well. And I don't think it's actually helpful. The person who pays, as it currently stand, no matter what we do, is the Tauranga ratepayer. And that's who we have to be mindful of, because the ratepayer, this is 100% targeted rate from our council. So therefore it is the ratepayer of Tauranga who will pay either way. I don't think it's helpful at this stage to start throwing grenades at each other. We actually have to have a game changer shift, and I think we're starting to see that with this collaboration. And so please don't, at the end of the day, we will work this thing through collaboratively together. This is going to take a whole of community approach. This is only the free fares part of it is just the first tip of the iceberg to resolving a long-term problem, and it's a societal problem, and it won't be an easy fix. But please, let's work together rather than fire grenades at one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, I don't do this very often, but I just want to total Councillor Von Duddleson. And actually, the fact of the matter is that over the past 6 months to a year, our relationship with Tauranga City Council has grown, particularly between councillors and commissioners. And so on this kaupapa, let's use those relationships and build those. Yes, there is a duty of care between both Regional Council and TCC that has been recognised. Now it's a matter of putting our words into action and actually figuring out how we're going to action out what we're talking about.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just felt compelled to respond to the comments that were made, and thank you, Von Duddleson and Councillor Rose, about your comments. And I definitely total that notion of the partnership improving, and in some of the responses to our presentation, I felt that we weren't quite being heard. I mean, we talked at length about the investment that we make into the security and safety of the travelling public, and I spoke about the infrastructure, and Paul spoke about the social issues, and I just wanted to emphasise again all the work that we do in that space. Apart from employing passionate, skillful staff like Jemima, although she's not there anymore. Many of our staff are very, very passionate about this, and do everything we can And maybe it was a misuse of your analogy, Councillor McDonald, but you know, there are only so many fingers you can stick in the hole in the boat, Doug, aren't there? You know, if your finger's big enough, you only need one. But I think, you know, the point here is that this is a partnership. It's not like Tauranga City Council aren't doing anything here. You know, we've been at pains to explain all of the initiatives that we're implementing to make it safe for the travelling public. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Nick. So I think this has been a very valuable debate discussion. Could I thank one and each of you for your time today? This will have an ongoing engagement in terms of the partners. As I said earlier, the partners that need to be around the table to try to get a resolution to the societal issues is much greater than what we've got here today. But if I could take a lead, and I'll address these comments through Clifford or Inspector Paxton, because ultimately, and sadly, you are the lead agency in terms of trying to address the immediate issues we're trying to address. Clifford, your autonomy in your allocation of resources is, as the area commander, is ultimately your call. And we might have suggestions, we might suggest, but we can't direct you in terms of what needs to be done. But in this instance, I think the community, the wider community, has spoken. Their expectation about delivery and resolution to these issues is probably higher than what it ever has been, driven by recent events in terms of criminal behaviour. The presence of a uniform, as Jemima says, is a deterrent. But it concerns me and worries me when, through our police liaison people, they tell us that some of these youths are carrying offensive weapons such as knives. That intervention lifts or needs to be lifted to a different level. And that's real intervention in terms of one-to-one, because that sort of attitude, the ability to carry offensive weapons unchallenged, is something that is just not a tenable position going forward. So I acknowledge, Clifford, that a lot of the direction that you have to serve or answer to is driven by Police National Headquarters. And I'd suggest that if you need assistance or advocacy or reconsideration of the deployment of your resources to nip this behaviour, this is the criminal behaviour, in the bud, then please just ask us. I have no what's the right word I'm looking for, reservation in terms of raising the issue with Mr. Costa or with Sandra Venables, who, as you well know, was a commissioned officer here in the wider Bay of Plenty, as well as she was in the Thames Coromandel area. Because you can make these policy decisions sitting in Wellington with the best of intent, but at the end of the day, it's your frontline officers who have to front these individuals and get the outcome that you want. And as you well know, frontline policing is difficult, but it can also be damn rewarding when you get results. I have some empathy for your officers who are endeavouring to do their best. But if policies and procedures are inhibiting the ability of them to put the necessary resources into trying to resolve this, then as a council and as a community, we want to stand up and support you if that needs to be done. So thank you.
Have a right to reply, Mr. Chair?
You can.
Look, at the end of the day, we'll certainly take responsibility as the lead for enforcement. That is our responsibility. We do not take responsibility for the buses, bus infrastructure, or mobility about the city. I think what's from my perspective is that at the end of the day, we need to arrive at a place where we understand each other's operating environment. What can we do to change the environment we've got currently? Entering into the blame game is not going to get us anywhere. We need to listen, hear, and understand each other's perspectives. So from my perspective, diverting resources from other areas to social issues for bus stops will have a cost to our communities. There's no doubt about that. We need to understand each other's perspectives, focus on what we can do to make that change. And certainly, as I said, we'll take responsibility as a lead for enforcement, but we will not take responsibility for the social issues that are occurring in the bus stops.
Councillor Thompson.
Mr Chair, I'll just seek your guidance, please. I have 2 questions of staff. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to have a break and then?
Well, I think we'll do it now whilst we've got our presenters here, and then they can depart knowing that this will be an ongoing conversation, and there'll be some resolutions might be forthcoming that involve all of us in terms of the way forward.
Yeah, no, thank you. And certainly echo your thanks and acknowledgement to our presenters today. There can be no doubt that the only way forward on a longer term basis is collective responsibility. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity to hear that commitment. 2 questions to you, Namuta, if I may. Jemima's presentation talked about things that need potentially to be done in terms of the security staff, excuse me, the right skills, vests, body cams, etc. Can you give us an assurance that those kinds of matters are being dealt with in the new contract?
Through the chair, yes, as you're aware, we did have a change. So that is one of the actions that we're taking, and we will follow up in relation to any additional activities we can. We will link with the security providers to work through those.
Thank you. My second question relates to where I'm really coming from personally, which is, the tragedy that's going to occur, I guess, for families, persons under 18 who may be, as a result of today's deliberations, stopped from having free access to services. And, I feel very strongly about that. Do we have data that tells us just how many, school-aged children are actually accessing the free services for after-school activities? So it's not just to and from school, but who actually access that service so they can participate in after-school activities.
Through the chair, the information we have immediately available is that within your paper. So we've got the off-peak data and the weekend data, which will give us a bit of a sense as in terms of out-of-school activities.
Thank you.
Right, last question, Councillor White.
Kia ora. Look, just to the collective, thanks for your presentation. I think it's great that there's a cohesion starting to happen in this space. But I just wanted to reflect very briefly, because I think it strikes to the nub of it all, the comments from Jemima and also from Clifford. Jemima's comment around the free bus fares. I mean, basically, she sees that as a solution in some ways for the now. To stymie the ability for the youth to move around is a solution, is part of a solution. The other one was actually making sure, and Councillor Thompson raised it, that the character of those security guards or the skill sets of those security guards needs to be able to, one, where they carry a sense of authority, but they have an empathy inside them that they can actually work with those communities, those hardcore communities. That is the sort of thing, not just strutting around, but having that ability to really tone in. As you mentioned, equipping them with vests, so you raise the authority and look and feel externally, but internally is where the magic happens. And I think really, really those filters need to happen to create that effective security system. And I just want to go back to Clifford's comment again, that there is a sense that we need some relief in order to address this particular problem. And part of that, again, was the free fares issue. And I know congestion, climate change, all those sorts of things, and being able to be fair to the rest of the community is on our agenda, and very much I have empathy for that. But we're trying to find some pragmatic solution to give some space to allow those pragmatisms to come forward and start working their magic. I'm just empathetic with where Clifford and Jemima have been commenting on, and would like to see some solutions forged around that particular space. And I guess we're going to be talking about the free fares and where we get to on that.
Thank you, Councillor White. Right. Thanks, Clifford. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Michelle, Paul, and Nick. Much appreciated. Thanks for your time. I know it's been a long morning, but hopefully it's worthwhile. Councillors, we're adjourned for 20 minutes. We'll reconvene at 11:40. Thank you, councillors. Can we reconvene, please? I want to take you to page 9 of your agenda, which is to, and I will move, receiving the deliberations overview of annual plan process and deliberations process. Seconded, councillor Love. All those, any discussion?
So we're just talking about the process. We're not talking about the detail, because through the meeting we're going to get into the detail. So
yes, just the initial paper that staff presented, which is the process we've been through.
We're not agreeing to everything.
No, not agreeing. Right, it's been moved and seconded. No further discussion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Chief Executive 8.2.
Thank you, councillors. So you have recommendations in front of you, and just to note the fourth recommendation, a change to that should be up on the screen. So Namuta and team have done a very good job with our providers to see how fast we can implement this change if you were to agree to restrict the free fair trial, and that is the recommendation is changed. The staff recommended option is to approve change to the free fair trial to the morning 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock and afternoon 3 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. Noting that this is expected to be implemented on the 4th of June 2022.
Councillor Neese.
I just am wondering my best approach, Mr. Chair. I've got some additional recommendations. Would you like me to propose them now to get them on the table?
So are they contrary to the recommendation we've got here, or are they additional?
They are additional, but I do want to signal that I have a different view on 4.
Okay, so if they're additional, I suggest you put them on the table now.
On the table now. Yeah. So I've provided a majority of them to Tony already, but I'll go through them. That the impact of the reduction of free fares for use be reviewed within 3 months and reported back to council so that the change to free fares can be reconsidered. So that's about understanding what the community, our experience as a result of it, whether or not it actually has provided that circuit breaker that we've been told will happen, and whether or not it's advisable to continue with that, bearing in mind that the trial was originally proposed and decided following consultation with the public that it extend to December 2022. So that's the first recommendation. The second, that staff provide funded B cards to schools to enable assistance to be provided to families experiencing financial hardship as a result of the reduction in free fares. That a wider task force be established to establish causes and long-term solutions for the public safety issues being experienced in Tauranga. That a communication strategy be developed as a matter of urgency to communicate the rationale behind the reduction in free fares. And then an additional one, that the Regional Council formally requests that TCC reconsider its position to not assist with funding the security contract in the Tauranga CBD on an ongoing basis.
I'll second those proposed motions.
So with your leave, Councillor Neese, looking at number 7, can I suggest that you might want to consider something, and I'm just thinking on my feet here, that a wider task force be established to investigate the societal causes and solutions that may, societal causes and possible solutions that have led to public safety issues being experienced in Tauranga. It's just that the way it reads there.
I'm happy with societal causes, but we're looking for long-term solutions.
Yes, we are.
For public safety issues, not that led to the problem we've got. So it's just, I just wonder about the words that you had. The societal causes that have led to the current issues and long-term solutions. I just think I'm quite happy as long as the meaning of it is retained. I'd go curious
Because-
how it's witnessed.
Because I think essentially what you're requiring, what we're endeavouring to achieve is that there's a task force put together of multiple agencies that someone's going to have to lead, that says someone's got to take a lead in trying to address the societal issues that have led to this public safety bad behaviour issues.
Absolutely, very happy with that.
Yeah, so it's just how we capture that in narrative. So with those additions, it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Thompson.
I have some difficulty, Mr. Chair. We have a resolution on the books. I would rather see those as amendments and they were debated individually. And I would probably prefer that a paper was prepared by staff on possible avenues of going down the road suggested there. We're overcomplicating it. There's a lot of agencies involved here. It's not about us doing this and that for societal problems. So I would prefer to have the original motion put and then debate through any amendments.
I'm not advising that we run the task force, just that we recommend that a task force is established, which we may be part of, that actually addresses this. But anyway, I'm quite happy that the motion's on the table first, and then run out of power.
Yeah, I think what Councillor Lees is endeavouring to do, she's already given notice that she wants some debate on the original motion, and whether or not this is a second motion, I have some sympathy for the intent. It's a matter of how we capture it. So with your leave, Councillor Lees, if we move back to the original motion, we can then debate that, and if you want to put a further resolution on the table, then capturing these issues, and I'm happy to accept that. Happy.
Point of clarification, please.
Yes.
Who has moved the original motion?
No one yet.
No.
No.
So there is no motion.
Oh, the recommendation from staff. Yeah.
But
Councillor
I'm
Thurston.
Chairman, just a clarification, on the 31st of January, I know this is all Tauranga and Western Bay specific and fully understand and fully support the reasons behind it all, but we rolled out a trial in Rotorua on the 31st of January to run for 12 months. And that was for 9 a.m. and from before 9 a.m. and from 2:30 to 6:30 p.m. Can I just seek some reassurance on behalf of my Rotorua colleagues in terms from the Moose Walk Fiona, in terms we are Rotorua and Whakatane, are they going to be caught in this whirlpool that's developing in Tauranga, or does this still stand alone?
Through you, Chair, we've got a number of trials working at the moment, they all stand alone. So we've got the trial in Rotorua, we've got the trial in Whakatane, and we've got the trial in Tauranga.
So this is very site specific,
Absolutely.
Western Bay.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Von Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite happy to move the first four as amended, with the times amended, to get it on the table. I have real concerns for a couple of are we going to debate I'm just not sure where you're going, whether because it's been moved and seconded, the additional bit,
it's essentially been rescinded by Councillor Neese on the basis that we introduce it later.
Okay.
So if you're prepared to move the recommendation, I can see in front of us, we've got a seconder, Councillor Crosby.
Yep.
Right, it's open for debate. Could I seek from the Chief Executive number 2, because we need to be aware of what this is in terms of the nominal dollar cost. And given the commentary this morning from Jemima, if you were to implement those issues in terms of body armour and cameras, that would need to be in addition to whatever the cost is we're looking at here, won't it?
Yes, through the chair. On page 5 of the separate item, the additional security costs are 200,000 for the full year, and anything additional that was discussed today would be on top of that.
Thank you.
Just for the clarification, did Councillor Neves, I may have missed it, did Councillor Neves, you were going to speak for the addendum or an amendment to number 4?
Yes, she was.
She may get considerable buy-in if she puts it up, I don't know.
I've got an answer to my question, Councillor Neves.
Well, I was going to suggest an amendment, Mr. Chair, to 4, on the basis of the fact that 4:30 will not allow many children to get home from school because of their after-school activities. And having a lot of interaction with intermediate and secondary school children, I do know that many after-school activities do not finish until at least 4:45. So if we cut it off at 4:30, then we're going to be inviting parents on the to come in their cars and to get stuck in traffic for up to an hour while they try and pick up their children who will be standing waiting on the side of the road. So I would actually be recommending that we change that to 5:30, not 4:30. My preference would be to make sure that the trials on school days match those in other areas of the region, but I think that's probably a step too far for some. So my recommendation is that the amendment to number 4 be 3:30 to 5:30, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to second that proposed amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Neves. It's been seconded by Councillor Thompson. Discussion. Councillor Norman.
Yeah, can I ask staff why they recommended 4:30?
So through the chair in the discussions with the police, they identified that most of the criminal activity happens from 4:30 to 6. No, earlier today we heard from Clifford Paxton who also provided further context in terms of the activity actually starting even earlier than that.
Councillor Von Duddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would speak against this alteration. It goes against the police report. And when I look at the figures for the off-peak versus the peak times, the off-peak is in 2021 was about 5% and no more than 7% of school children using off-peak versus peak in 2022. So it doesn't lead me to believe that it's going to affect such a huge amount of people as was considered when we're talking of the off-peak at 8,000 to 10,000 people. That's over a whole month, so that's quite a lot of divide that up. So I would stick at the moment with me. I mean, we can review it, the timing of it. I'm quite happy to do that, but not initially. I think we need to support the police and what they're looking for here. I think it's reasonable. It's based on evidence, and that's where we should be going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleston. Councillor White.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just going to make that comment that Namuta made, that I recall that the police indicated that the trouble time was 5 o'clock or whatever it was to 6:30. So you're going to hit the hotspot. You're either going to slam the door shut for the purposes of this exercise or leave it a little bit open. And these are opportunist kids. So so they're going to take the opportunity to exploit that extra time to get on those buses and do their bit, would be my view. That's my point on point 4, and I'd rather keep it at 4:30. On the other one, on 2, the additional security costs, it wasn't so much, I mean, I hope it doesn't mean we're going to have more security. That's not the problem. The problem is the quality of security people, and putting more into the building of that capability or selection process and skill set is where that money should go. So the typical thing is, we'll throw more people on board, we'll do this, and that should, no, that's not going to do it. It's a right people, right place, right look externally, and right field internally, in my view.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I don't support the proposed amendment. I think it'll go some way to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here in the short term. I think that issue, which is real, could be addressed in your subsequent recommendations, with schools and B cards, etc., for those that would be transport disadvantaged. I think it could fall into that conversation moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. So this question I was going to ask Chief Executive, was that in your proposed amendments that you had, Councillor Neves?
B cards. Yes.
Was it? Okay.
B cards was.
With that,
No, because mine's about congestion and about children waiting on the side of the road, Mr. Chair.
yeah, but the issue Councillor Crosby raised about the ability of the organisation to provide B cards, is that something that was included in some of your recommendations? That's fine. And that's an issue, that's an achievable outcome that we can put in place.
Yes, through you, Chair. We did this initially when B cards were introduced. We went to the schools and asked how many. And what it would mean is that we would be going to the schools, and schools would determine who were the families experiencing financial hardship and passing them on. I would look to have some funding put on those B cards so that those children will be able to access the buses after school activities.
Councillor Thurston.
So I'll be supporting Councillor Neves' amendment, but it is also just reaffirmed to me that it's subject to a full review within 3 months.
No.
Number 5, if it goes through.
We haven't got to that yet. We're only doing 1 to 4.
Yes, what we're dealing with is
Thank you, Councillor.
Out of necessity, I'm just going to deal with number 4 as the amendment. Okay. And in my view, the other issues that Councillor Neves have raised can be by way of separate resolution that would then be an addendum in terms of expectation regarding what we're now dealing with, or hope to deal with in terms of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So any further speakers? If not, sorry, Mr. Eady.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I would like to echo Councillor White's concerns just around the increased funding of security. If you look at the report, it is just about increasing security and not much detail around how we're going to do that and what the overall strategy is, and taking into account the presentation by Gemma earlier this morning. I would feel more comfortable that there was more detail around how we're increasing security, that it's not just about numbers and getting more people out there, that there is actually some weight given to the strategies that we're talking about. Of course, body cams and security and vests and so forth, but also around the types of security that are being put on the front line. Do they have that training, that X factor that Gemma was talking about this morning? Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Eady. I'll give the opportunity to the Chief Executive to speak to that after I've had Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, in regard to resolution 4, I don't agree that it should be 5:30, nor do I agree that it should be 4:30. And in fact, I'd actually put a motion to make it 5 o'clock, so it sits at that kind of right in the middle. Because the thing is that 4:30, you're going to be preventing a lot of our rakatahi who use that free transport as such for after school sports and all, from getting to and from places, and that's not good. However, at the same time, recognising that the police have said that the timings are really between 5 o'clock and 6:30, so cutting it at 5 o'clock so that they cannot move after 5 p.m. Is a way forward for that. However, I also just want to put out there that this isn't going to stop them from moving around. Like, it's not that hard for these young people to find $1.60. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on it. But yeah, I kind of sit in the middle on the.
Thank you, councillor Rose. So what I intend to do is to put the amendment.
Oh, Mr Chair, I was happy.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a right of reply, councillor.
No, I was saying I'm happy to accept 5 o'clock rather than 5:30, based on what councillor Rose said.
As the second is our line.
So with the leave of the mover and the seconder, we will change that. So your original moving and seconding was rescinded on the basis you shift from 4:30 to 5 p.m. Correct? 4:30 to 5 p.m. Okay, councillors, any further commentary?
So we're just voting on 4.
You're just voting on 4 at the moment, and which is the amendment. Okay, so all those who support the amendment, please raise your hand. Against? Oh, what about our caller? Sorry, did you?
Yeah, but it doesn't look like there was 5 to 6, so someone abstained.
Yeah, sorry.
Start again, yeah. I'm still
Right,
thinking,
so
I was still
we'll
thinking
do
about
it again. Sorry, it's my mistake. I wasn't considering our colleagues on Zoom. So all those in favour of the amendment, raise your hand.
That's 3 to 5 p.m, right?
Yes.
Okay.
7, 8, we got 8.
Oh, there's another one.
Against? Carried. Okay, so the amendment becomes a substantive motion. So we now go back to the substantive motion, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4, with the change from 4:30 to 5. Any further discussion, councillor Crosby?
If I may, just some quick observations of it. I am in support of it, obviously. With regard to 3, I have a concern about that. You know, that impost on this council as a result of Tauranga City Council demolishing their civic building. I would have thought there was a strong case for some support in that space. With regard to 4, which we've just discussed, you know, sadly, there has been some unintended consequences of a very well-intended trial. And, you know, that's very concerning, but I think we have no choice at this point in time to take that action as recommended by some other authorities.
Thank you, councillor Crosby. So, original motion's been moved and seconded, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Donaldson, Crosby, thank you. So, no further discussion? All those in favour?
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, I just want a bit more discussion on 2 and 3, please. The security costs. I think we might be getting into a very expensive knee-jerk reaction as to. I'm very supportive of vests, but whether we put body cameras, you know, are we if we're funding that, if that's the intention, or built into the that could be very expensive, and are we sure what the costs are and where it lies? So I just think that's a little bit vague at this stage, and also with the change to the of $343,000 to do this interchange, are staff absolutely firm that that is going to be the true cost? Because that was the cost that was put in initially when they were looking at moving buses down to Sulphur Point to thing. Are they still of the mind that that is the way it has to happen? You know, where is the thinking at the moment? Is that still currently necessary? Thank you. I'd like staff response.
Thank you, Councillor Von Buddleson. So if I can help before I pass to the Chief Executive. It's implied in 2 that there will be additional security costs. I would imagine before those costs are signed off, they will come back to the council for full consideration. But what Councillor White said is critical here, which is the quality of the service. Now that's implicit in terms of ongoing discussion about the quality of the individuals fronting the security detail. Chief Executive, any comment on 2 and can you answer 3?
Yes, so in regards to 2, councillors will be aware that we entered into an emergency contract to get the new service contractor in place by the 16th of May. We'll bring a full report back to the Public Transport Committee because we're seeking to look at increased security and to procure again by the end of October this year. So there are a number of suggestions made at this meeting, which we will consider with NZ Bus, and we'll come back to the Public Transport Committee in terms of the procurement for that permanent contract.
Right, councillors, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillor Nees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, if Tornade could bring up my recommendations. I don't know whether you want me to go through them, but I do believe that the rationale for making the change to the free fares was to act as a circuit breaker to see if we can restrict the movement of these youths in the interim until the social agencies can get on top of it, and police can actually marshal their resources and their security firm can become more effective to ensure that we're dealing with this very small number of disruptive youth. So I would, the intention of this is that because we haven't consulted on this, we consulted when we put it in place, but as far as the public is concerned, this is going to come to like a big shock to many parents who have learned to rely on this. We haven't even discussed the free weekend fares. Now, there may be some people that are very unhappy about that. And I'm conscious that we have rated for this service. So I would like this to be reviewed and reported back to us so that we can see if it's actually working. It may need to be adjusted. I don't know, but that's my rationale for number 1. Number 2, we've already talked about. That's to address any hardships that may result from taking away free fares in the weekends, etc., where kids maybe have been going to jobs and that sort of thing. The wider task force is just the regional council putting together its support behind some sort of task force to address this issue, and it's going to be a system-wide response, and I would imagine it would include not only the groups that are already talking about it, but I believe it will include Ministry of Education, Oranga Tamariki, NSD, so the actual agencies that are operating on the ground, like the Bay of Plenty Youth Development Trust, Te Awanui Trust, Live for More. There's a lot of agencies that are actually working very hard in this at-risk youth space, as well as, and I might say, the funders who've got a substantial amount of money to fund agencies to address this issue. So that's the rationale behind that. It's to put our support behind a wider task force approach. The communication strategy, I think, is an absolute no-brainer because it's going to come as an awful surprise to many people that suddenly, because of a small number of youths, their families and their children are going to be disadvantaged. And I think the a formal request that TCC reconsiders its position not to fund the security contract.
So, Councillor Nees, can I seek a small change
sure.
in terms of that one? Because as you read it there, it could imply that they fund the security contract in CBD, where I think your intent, if we could just change or have in there co-fund.
Yes. I think it was to contribute to fund it. That's okay. The co-fund is fine.
Okay, thank you.
So that is about getting them to accept that's what they used to do in the past, it's what other councils do, and we believe it's what they should be doing now.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. It's been moved and seconded. So, Councillor Eatey, Councillor Love.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. I'm very supportive of these additional recommendations, and I would like to actually congratulate Councillor Nees for putting these forward. I do, though, have questions around number 7, and I would be more comfortable if staff were to provide a report on this, because I'm, I guess, around the financial implications of handing out these cards? What are the parameters, as well as just some details around that? I think it needs a little bit more detail before we push that one through.
Thank you. Councillor Von Duddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's go back to the first one, the impact of a reduction of fares to be reviewed within 3 months. I don't think that this is a realistic expectation. When we look at how long we needed, and we got priority to get to change the B card free fare to the Queen's birthday, we had to do that with a little bit of arm twisting. These things don't happen overnight, and I'm not sure that 3 months is a reasonable time to review this. The other thing to think about is this trial, and it is a trial, finishes in December, I believe, 2022, and so I think we need to be more flexible than to put it within 3 months. Yeah, you're putting another huge amount of work onto staff at a time when we're trying to do a total review of the bus system for Tauranga. We've completed part of it through the Papamoa area, but there's a hell of a lot more to do, and the expectation on staff is I think is unreasonable for a 3 month report back. If you're you could report back, but to expect it to change before an outcome from it, will we get a response within 3 months to have a good understanding? I'm not sure, but by the time you actually enacted the result of a report back, we would be sitting at the end of the trial period anyway. So 6, I have concerns with. 7, staff funding a funded B card for schools and putting money on it. I think this is fraught with danger. The sentiment is nice, but to make sure that it is fair and equitable, I think it is fraught with danger, and supplying a B card is one thing, but putting funds on it, I think we should be very careful before we do that, and I don't think we should be doing that at this stage. As far as the task force, I'm absolutely in support of that, and it's something that I think, given our responsibility, that we can act as a coordinator. We would only be a coordinator, and a participant, but I think it's really worthwhile. The communication strategy is absolutely vital, and I think that that is, and it needs to be coordinated around also the shift in the CBD interchange up to Durham Street. So there's a lot of work to do in the communications, and I'd like to see our combined staff, Tauranga City and Bay of Plenty Regional Council, working collaboratively together to get a really good comms package out. Number 10, formally request them at the end of the day, it is the ratepayer who's paying for this. So I wouldn't die in a ditch over this personally at the moment. I think it's what we all want, but I think we can actually, there's more than one way to skin the cat, and I don't think putting a formal motion will help the relationship between the two councils that has been fractured in the past, and it's starting to get repaired. And I think we can be a bit more subtle about going about that. So I can't support 10 in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleton. I'll ask the Chief Executive to reply in regard to a couple of the issues you've raised there, number 6 and 7.
Thank you, Councillor. In regards to number 6, staff have looked at this recommendation, and we will reprioritise the week program to enable that to happen. You do have to review all the trials that you have in place at the moment, as the chair of the Petty Committee has said, because they run through to December 2022. And so we think that is achievable. It will be tied to your decisions around the regional public transport plan. So if that is delayed at all, then this will be potentially delayed. So those two go hand in hand. So we can do 6. And in regards to 7, we have done this before, Councillor, in terms of providing B cards to schools to support their decisions in terms of who needs those. And in terms of costs, we're looking at costs of less than $15,000 for that. So staff have assumed up to 500 B cards to be allocated across schools with $20 on them, because you will be aware at the moment the fare that is paid is a half price fare, so it's 80 cents per trip. And so I think a $20 funded amount is reasonable. And finally, if the councillors will review, could we add the wording to recommendation 8 at the end with terms of reference to be approved by Bay Plenty Regional Council and other agencies? Just to be clear in terms of lead agencies, and make sure we have all the agencies that you mentioned, Councillor Neves, as part of this work.
Right, thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, in regard to number 6, 7 and 8, I'm more than happy to support those, particularly number 7. I only have one question around that, and that is, when we talk about providing B cards to schools, are we talking just in Tauranga? Are we including the the schools within the Western Bay, so the likes of Tipoke High School and Katikati College? Are we including those guys in the mix as well? That was just one partai. And the other is in regard to the wider task force. Would we want to change that wording from Tauranga to Tauranga and the Western Bay? Because to think about it, when we look at what's going on, there are students from both Katikati College and Tipoke High School as well that are involved in these situations. So that's my only partai around that, is making it more of a sub-regional thing rather than just a city-wide thing. The only thing with number 9 is making sure we do it properly, and make sure it gets out to all of our community, because in some ways we can get it right, in some ways we can get it wrong. And over the past few years, I've seen it go wrong and go right. And the thing is we as a council need to ensure something as important as this needs to be done right. So we can be certain that the strategy and the communication strategy is being done to the best of the ability and is getting out to every single person that needs to hear it. Katie Ply. And then number 10, I'm in full support of. I would just ask though, in regards to wording, would it be better to say Tauranga City Council rather than TCC, or does that not matter?
I don't think it matters, Chief Executive.
In answer to your question, yes, we'll provide it to the schools. We talk regularly to all the schools in Western Bay, Councillor Rose.
Councillor White.
Yeah, Katie.
Yeah, and looking at all of these, I mean, I generally support. I mean, the front and centre for me is that our duty of care and health and safety of our communities is front and centre in what we do, and I think that covers it. Just going through it now, number 7, the B card to schools, and then they make a determination who's financial hardship, effectively who's poor, really, who's got the poverty problem. And also you're talking about, those who have the poverty problem, I'm only making this assumption, might have the more troubled kids who are in that particular category. Maybe they don't. So, and these kids are going to be, so these kids, like it's already been said, the opportunists, they're street smart, they know how to go through the system, and I can see them sort of being able to access these B cards for other reasons, like what they're doing now. So anyway, I'll park that. I don't think it's foolproof at all. I think it's subject to potential abuse. Number 8, the wider task force. It's interesting to examine the societal causes. Well, I think they're pretty well known out there. If you go to each of the agencies, the amount of work, if you look through iwi eyes, you're going to see all sorts of societal problems coming forward. And whether you need a task force to just to re-identify that, as opposed to maybe having some of our, well, I hate to put it on Fiona and them, staff really examining, doing a desktop study of all of those documents and coming up with the societal causes, because they're pretty well known, in my view. The problem is these agencies working in silos and actually not connecting together. And therefore, how do you get the agencies to work together on those societal problems is the problem, in my view. So that's all I've got to say. Other than that, I'm generally supportive, although I just put those marks of awareness from my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Crosby.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very supportive of the extra recommendations because they demonstrate a pathway forward rather than just a punitive action that we've had to take with regard to the free bus service. There's a bit of an 80-20 rule here. No, it won't be perfect straight away. And I'm sure staff will advise us all the way through in terms of what is required. So I'll just leave it at that. We couldn't just leave it at resolution 4, and I congratulate Councillor Neves for putting this forward and demonstrating that, there is a collective plan ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. Councillor Brunning.
Yes, I think I have to admit that I can't support this. And I don't want to go through them all individually. The Chief Executive has expressed that a lot of this will happen in due time. The 3-month review, we get reviews, we'll get that coming out in our reports. These cards to schools, Fiona said that she supports that. The wider task force, another wad of paper to go on the top shelf, I'm afraid, until we get agencies together, and I don't see us being the lead agency in that. And who's going to fund that? And then the communication strategy, well, staff will do that anyway. And then I cannot support requesting the City Council, as Councillor Von Dardelson said, we are trying to establish better relationships, and I think it is starting to work with Tauranga City Council, and then to go and formally request that they help fund the security side when they are already doing their share of the security side, as pointed out by Nick Johansson, with security cameras. And that's ongoing, monitored 24 hours of the day, that sort of stuff. So don't underestimate what's being done there. Let's continue to have a discussion with them, but not to form their request. So I will be voting against the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. Councillors, any other further discussion? Councillor Love, E. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought you'd forgotten me, actually. I just want to remind all councillors that there's no such thing as a free bus fare. Somebody has to pay. And what we're doing is we're just shifting the burden from one part of the community to another. And certainly a large number of people who use the buses are the retired people who are really hurting at the moment with the amount of rates we're putting and the general cost of living. And I think it's unfair that they should be paying for this when they have absolutely no benefit from it whatsoever. I want to go back to the original decision to have free bus fares. We had a comment yesterday. It was a well thought out and properly developed policy. But if you look at the minutes, what actually happened was the staff brought forward a paper which asked for bus fares or for free bus fares.
Councillor Love, can I remind you, you should be speaking to the resolution.
I am speaking to the resolution.
But you're introducing previous resolutions that have been passed.
Well, all I would say is that the previous decision was taken on the hoof. It was made as an amendment to the original suggestion from council against councillors' advice. What we're doing now is we're making policy again on the hoof, this council has got a history of making policy on the hoof and regretting it. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, the proper course at this stage is for us all to vote against those amendments and ask the staff to come back with a properly considered paper on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Love. Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to support the amendments and thank Councillor Lees for that. However, I want to comment on number 8. This morning I heard from TCC staff member that they have a strategy where they are currently engaging with youth and with agencies as well. So I would like to see how we can support that as opposed to establishing a task force before even our looking at establishing a task force and the way that we may be doubling up on what we're wanting to achieve. So I'd like to recommend that we have a discussion with TCC as to what we're doing, because it's something that we can support without having to double create something that we're looking to address here. And the other thing, I just want to support what Councillor White raised and around the investigation around society causes, because I believe that we already know what the society causes are, and there's probably just a very brief report from staff. So those are just the comments I made, but overall I do support those. And the other thing why I do support it is that I think it expresses the weight of the topic that we're discussing and the wider topic of what we're discussing here. That while we're focusing on free fares, there is a deeper issue here. So I think by having these extra amendments demonstrates our acknowledgement of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald.
Sorry, I'm happy for the wording to be amended. I wasn't thinking that we necessarily had to be the one establishing the task force, rather that we participate in a task force approach. That was my intention, because I'm aware that this bit of work is a precursor to, okay, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to work together for better outcomes for youth? And TCC is doing some work, but so is Acorn and Protect and Bay Trust. So I think it could all be rolled together. And this is just one urgent issue that needs to be addressed by such an approach.
Yes, as the seconder, I'd be happy to amend the number 8 so it reads at the start that the Regional Council participates in a task force approach. ...
That's fine. Councillor Clark.
This is not strictly on course, but I would just like to register my dismay that we have now spent 2.5 hours and a great deal of time in attempting some form of social engineering to mitigate the behaviour of 15 individuals in our councils. And I think this is not what I came to this table to do. It's a poor use of time and resources. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So this discussion has been important, and I do support the resolutions from 6 to 10 on the basis, and I endorse Councillor Crosby's commentary. The previous 1 to 4, 1 to 5 is a bit barren with the supporting thing here. And yes, it's not going to be right. There's 80-20 rule here. And if you want to deal with number 8, there are a multitude of national investigations into societal issues. But in terms of our responsibility here, when you have Jay from NZ Bus saying, from his national and international experience, the behaviour that's being displayed in our community is the worst that he has seen, then that's why I support at least putting a group together to say, why is this so bad relative to other places? So we've just got to move on. So I think the discussion has been worthwhile in the interest of the community and the safety of the staff, which I've made comment on before. So, councillors, it's been moved and seconded. We've had discussion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Chief Executive, we move through to 8.3, Transport and Urban Planning, Namuta and James.
Koto councillors, myself and James, we will take the report as read, and essentially you asked us to go away and find additional sources for funding for different activities and what we could do. This paper represents what we've been able to do in terms of reprioritising existing budgets, so we're happy to take questions.
Councillors' questions. Councillor Crosby, I remind you of the discussion we had yesterday. There's some items here which you raised yesterday. Let's cut to the chase and have a hard discussion.
Thanks, Namuta. Just for absolute clarity, can you explain what the recommendation is to have in the budget and what's the recommendation to change? Because the resolutions aren't that clear, particularly two. So, for example, what you're saying is that A, B, and C are obviously on priority, but it doesn't say that they're either in, assuming that they're staying in until someone decides to take them out.
Yes, so through the chair, it's my understanding that from discussions last time, you noted that there was interest in progressing these and you wanted us to come back and see what we could do within existing budgets. So what we've come back to you with is to seek to get your decision on, we've got the slide up there, 250k in terms of the transport emissions, a total of 250k for the hydrogen bus, 200 CapEx, 50,000 OpEx, and to note that in terms of the on-demand trial, we've got further work underway and we'll be coming back to the Public Transport Committee.
Councillor Crosby.
Oh, it's just my personal view is I do support the priorities except for two. I don't see that as a high priority in consideration of what's happening in other parts of New Zealand and around the world. I don't think we have to reinvent that wheel. I do appreciate, as it was explained, it's a retrofit trial as opposed to creating a new hydrogen bus. But I'm sure there must be other entities also considering that option.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Crosby. Councillor Von Battleson, Winters and then Nees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So starting off with the emissions reduction plan of 250,000, I can't quite see, it includes the Tauranga refresh savings, but this is an additional 250,000. Is that what I'm getting from this? Could staff first of all clarify that? So you're looking, as well as doing the refresh, which is work in progress anyway, you're looking at doing an extra 250,000. And what does that actually entail? And then I'll carry on.
So through the chair, we've sourced the 250,000 from existing consultancy budgets and also from some of the savings on the Tauranga refresh.
Yes, and what are you going to spend the 250,000 actually on? Because the reason I ask is the best emission savings that we can do is to find a way to get more people to use our buses. If at the moment we seem to have 3 or 4 maximum on most or none on buses, and unless we get 7 people on, we're not beating the car. And so if we can get at least 10 people on a bus, then we're going to have that's our first emissions reduction, and we need to go a lot further than that. But I want to know, let's get the first thing right before we go on to the next thing. I want to see us looking down the track and having smaller EV buses, or I talked yesterday about the converting carbon dioxide with hydrogen to make a synthetic fuel, which would run all your buses. And that might be, there's so much technology that is changing so fast but I can't see where this money's really going. It just look, at a time when we have extra costs, you've just seen it in the last things that we've with the security, it's all costing more money. I don't think we have to actually add any more into our budget than we have already. I think we should be looking for savings. So I would like clarification on that 250,000. With regard to the hydrogen trial, I am totally opposed to it. As was said yesterday, it reminds me of the hydrofoil for cleaning up mangroves.
Mr. Von Duddleton, can you give us the opportunity to answer the questions?
Well,
so I'll go to James. James, it's a plan, right?
Through the chair, yes. So the context for this is that 2 days ago, as I'm sure councillors are aware, the government published its national emissions reduction plan, which seeks to make some very deep cuts to the carbon dioxide emissions that are currently being generated. Now, as part of that process, the regional council is looking to undertake a transport emissions reduction plan to understand what can be done to meet the targets for transport specifically. And in both Tauranga and the region as a whole, transport is a huge contributor.
If I can interrupt, that plan will come back to councillors for their sign-off.
It will, that's right.
That's all we want. So it's a plan that will come back to you for sign-off in terms of implementation, Councillor Von Duddleton. Councillor Winters.
In the interests of moving forward, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move 1, 2 and 3, but I'd like to delete 2B in its entirety for the reasons that I don't think we should be going down that line yet. In light of the Crown's announcements 2 days ago, James, they've got a plan going forward. I don't want us to be duplicating or in contrast and conflict with the Crown's 230 emissions. So I'd like, I'll move 1, 2 and 3, but delete 2B, please.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. Seconded by, was that Stacey Rose? Seconded by Councillor Stacey Rose. It's open for discussion. Councillor Nees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to check with staff what items are we not funding by diverting money from the consultancy budget? What work are we not doing? Or would we have been using that consultancy budget to develop the emissions, some sort of emissions plan anyway?
Yeah, through the chair, we probably would use some of our consultancy budget to do that, but this additional funding will allow us to do a much more robust job. And given the amounts of money that could be needed to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, it's really important that we focus very clearly on the measures that are going to have the biggest impact. And therefore, we need money for option assessment and modelling to understand, where we would put our investment.
With regard to the hydrogen bus trial, I did support this initially because I felt it was a gap. I'm not so sure it's a gap anymore, given where the government's going with the new announcements for a whole lot of funding for practical solutions to deliver low emissions transport. So I'm not sure that the government has already got plans to do this work. So pending understanding of that, I'm comfortable to support the proposed recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillor Brennan.
Yes, I think we've got to draw ourselves back a little bit to who's paying this, and we've on previous debates today talked about the cost to society and trying to reduce the cost of fares on buses, and now we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on savings that we may have made elsewhere in the budget, and I think this money still belongs to the public. And therefore, I can't support any of this at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I did support the hydrogen bus trial initially because I thought it was innovative And I thought it could, with 10 odd, with the diesel fleet that we've got, that was an issue that we had to address to contribute to climate change positively. So I thought that was quite innovative and had an impact. I'm not so sure now if the government are going to come into the space, and Kei Te Paitera, I'm okay to drop that one on that basis. But I do think in looking at this, we talk about what it's going to cost the ratepayer, and that's extreme. That nobody's denying that's really important. But we're also charged with climate change initiatives, things that will make changes in that space. And what is the type of investment that will impact positively and give us value return in that space? Because as regional council, I would have thought that's one of our key parameters of operation. So on that basis, I'll always look at these things from an impact point of view, not just, we need to cut here, we need to save costs here. Yeah, absolutely, but not at the potential return and value of opportunity. And that's all I'm saying really. So take the hydrogen out. I'm happy with the rest.
Okay, thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Bray.
A point of a clarification, which account is this funding coming out of?
Which one? First one or second one?
All three of them.
All three of them. Chief Executive. The first one came out of savings and consultancies.
It's through the Public Transport Activity, Councillor Bunning, but you will note that given the need for public transport in the Western Bay, you also allocated reserve funding. And particularly for the Tauranga South London Passenger Trail, you note in the paper that these additions are through reprioritisation, but also that you're seeking not to have any increase in the target rate for Western Bay ratepayers.
So some of the funding of this is coming from targeted rates.
For these particular things, no, not at this stage.
Councillor.
But it was from savings. Not from savings of the target. Not from the savings of the targeted rate.
I'll get Matt to answer that because it's quite a technical question.
Through you, Chair, the savings from the network refresh was a targeted rate saving, so that is to the Tauranga ratepayers only. So any repurposing of that money would have been reducing the targeted rate instead of expenditure on this reduction plan. So that is where that offset is. So that's the choice, as you said, you have today: either reduce the targeted rate or spend it on this item.
I can't support certainly targeted rates being used on this.
Thank you, Councillor Rose and Councillor Thurston. Oh, you've gone, Councillor Rose. That's fine.
No,
Councillor Thurston.
Half an hour ago, I was going to move the motion be put killing the hydrogen bus. That's okay. We'll have the day in court. No, just in terms of clarification, and I know that there's going to be further scoping on the Tauranga South demand trial, but just for the benefit of colleagues, that was to originally have been an 18-month trial funded by targeted rates and borrowing. So, and an answer, as we all know, to community demands. But I would move that the motion be put as proposed by Councillor Winters.
Thank you. Right, motion's been moved and seconded. We've had the discussion. All those in favour, and let's be clear, we're confirming the motion on page 14 and 15 with the deletion of 2B. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Deliberation statement of proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've consulted on 4 statements of proposal that were developed through a number of council workshops and meetings last year. You've now had the opportunity to receive, read, hear and consider submissions from the public on those 4 statements of proposal. The first of these was changes to the revenue and financing policy to enable, but not set in the next financial year, 2 targeted rates for sustainable home repayments and also for the potential for funding regional infrastructure projects. There were no submissions received that opposed those, and the submissions received were in support. So we're proposing that we continue with those revenue and financing policy changes. On the fees and charges policy, there were a few main changes, moving some charges to fixed fees because there's little variation in those, an increase of approximately 8% to most charges, and noting that some charges are on a fixed fee and some are on a reasonable basis for the amount of time spent processing the consent or monitoring compliance, and waiving offset charges from RI. There were a variety of opinions expressed in hearings yesterday, which you'll have a chance to have thought about. On reflection on those, we still believe the existing policy as drafted is sound, and the level of increase in the fees and charges reflects your revenue and financing policy and the correct apportionment of costs to the consent holders versus the wider ratepayer. So the staff opinion is to continue with those charges with the change to the proposed policy, with the 8% increase, which reflects the higher than forecast level of inflation at the time. The third policy was the remission and postponement of rates policy. That is required under our approach to collecting rates in-house. This is very much intended to be an interim policy and with a full review in this coming year. There are a number of areas where we need better data through collecting the rates ourselves and to do some wider engagement. So all of those submission points raised around remission and postponements of rates, we intend to take those fully through to the next review process. The final statement proposal was about joining a regional shared sector services organisation. We currently receive services from that organisation. This is merely about becoming a shareholder to better influence the direction of the projects that organisation offers. Again, all submissions received are in support, and we intend to continue with that proposal. Happy to take any questions, comments, discussion, direction on any of those.
Councillor Winters.
Oh, happy to move 1, 2 and 3 except 2D. And, just a question, can you give me an assurance that if we go down the line of 3, that there's going to be no conflict in terms of duties, procurements with BOTLES in terms of what these two organisations are going to do?
So my understanding, Councillor, is that there is no conflict. The Regional Shared Sector Service Organisation specifically looks at functions that are delivered by regional councils, not at things like how we cooperate with the local councils. So things like better environmental monitoring data systems that support those, which isn't a function shared with local councils.
Thank you. Happy to move in whatever I did.
So it's been moved a second. A question mark. Can you just go back to the previous slide that you had up, please? About rates remission. Noting that no one that currently receives a remission will be affected in 22-23.
Yeah. So one of the remission criteria we said was a transition provision to make sure that no one was inadvertently affected. So if a ratepayer receives a remission in this financial year and they receive a remission from their local authority in the next financial year, we will honour that and apply the same remission percentage on our rates next financial year. That is to make sure there were no unintended consequences of our policy changes.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation has been moved and seconded.
I think part of that, Mr. Chairman, is that no one is worse off by going us collecting our own rates in the meantime. And that's what's.
Councillor Browning.
Yes, just on the submission from Western Bay District Council yesterday on the Maori rates, and I appreciate we're not fully doing it until 2024, but it would certainly be advantageous, and you may have discussed it informally yesterday, that we do have a coordinated approach, and I urge staff to, go down that road as far as they can to have the same policy.
Thank you, Councillor Browning. So the recommendation has been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
One other, not part of that resolution, but it was part of the submission yesterday from the Tauranga Chamber, and that was especially around the social licence of the Port of Tauranga. And I don't think we should let that go
unnoticed. And I certainly do not want to get involved in telling the Port of Tauranga what to do. But I do wonder whether we should not be having a discussion with Quayside around the social licence and what the Port of Tauranga may need to do to lift its profile as a corporate citizen of Tauranga, as well as the wider region. And, you know, I take that on board. We have a growing port, we have a successful port, but it's still, if the public go against it, we've got a real problem.
Points well made. Be rest assured that some of the planning for that is well in hand. But it was noteworthy in this morning's Herald business pages, there's a large write-up about the Maersk shipping line taking a large investment in Tainui Group Holdings at Rokura. So that is the investments that are being made, and inevitably that will have an effect in terms of the agreement through the Kotahi agreement with the port here in Kotahi and Maersk. So yeah, it's on our radar.
Can I just add that I've been in touch with the CEO of the port and of Quayside, because we can do better in terms of our communications, and be better in terms of the transparency of those communications. So we're working on that now.
Mr. Crosby.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting submission. The other part of it was from the chamber was the utilisation of the dividend as such. In other words, create a split potentially in the dividend, either at Quayside's level or our level here, back in the regional council, to obviously continue to support the rating requirement or divert some into regional infrastructure. And that was really around not pipes and drains and things, but social infrastructure. And I think as we move forward in our revised treasury management strategy that we're going to do, Mr. Taylor, that's a genuine conversation I think we need to have in terms of our over-reliance, in my view, of the Quayside dividend to support rating requirements. It's the subject of their next paper, but that should be part of the conversation moving forward.
Right, thank you. So where are we up to now?
Page 36. 36.
No, we're not. We're up to 8.5, page 25, financial overview and implications. Kamara?
36. Yeah. We're both right.
Oh, which one are you looking at? Sorry. Right, Kamara, where we go?
Thank you, Chair. So this slide and report, which I'll take as read, essentially provides councillors with the rating impacts for council in the build-up of the annual plan process to this point at the start of this meeting. So essentially, taking all of the discussion topics around next year's budget into account, essentially council's operating spend for the draft annual plan is currently sitting at 178 million, capital expenditure at 34 million. The rating impacts for that is a total real rates increase of 3.8%, made up of a general rates increase of 5.8% and targeted rate increase of 2%. So that's essentially taking into account current market factors, council's operational priorities, its capital program, and the levels of service intended for next financial year.
You can move on to 26, Mr. Chairman, 1 and 2.
Must be getting near lunchtime, is it?
Oh, look, holiday.
It's moved Councillor Winters, seconded Councillor Thurston. Any further discussion, Councillor Neves?
Yes, thank you. Just a clarification, does that 178 million OPEX and 34 million CAPEX, does that include the proposed carry ports?
Yes, it does.
That's great. Thank you.
Councillor Crosby.
Yes, I support this going through to, our decision day, but again, I note the opening balance of the regional fund reserve is yet again depleting. And when you go through to where the rubber hits the road on page 33, the actual impact on average across the various TLAs, generally there's not a lot of movement, and that's because we are using reserves, and that is not sustainable.
We've had this discussion before, Mr. Crosby. Okay, councillors, it's been moved and seconded. No further discussion. Put the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Summing up next steps.
So Siobhan was going to do this, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that this will be the last meeting that we see Siobhan. He's got a very big role with immigration, New Zealand, and so just to thank Siobhan for all that he's done to date and getting us through this annual plan process. Siobhan, do you want to come to the table?
So thank you. As mentioned earlier, the guidance given today will be compiled into a revised budget annual plan that will be presented to you for your adoption on the 23rd of June, including the adopted policies, the revised policies with the guidance provided today. That will allow us to then prepare the final annual plan, as well as strike the rates for the upcoming financial year. We're doing it on the 23rd of June. That ensures we have time in place in case there's anything untoward occurs, and we'll still be able to meet our statutory deadline. Thank you.
Any questions of Siobhan? No, thank you, Siobhan. So that brings us to the end of consideration. Anything to add, Sharon? No? There's no other items on the agenda. So I will declare the meeting closed.